Bob, Katie, okay, gotcha. There's Rez, there's Bob. Patty's coming. Erica is coming, hopefully. All right. There's Erica. Okay, maybe Tom. Hopefully Tom soon.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Very good. Okay, Patty. 8:00. All right. I'm sure she'll be with us in a moment here.
For some reason, I keep getting bounced out of the video, so I just
We can't see you.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Why don't we go ahead? It's 8:00 or 8:01. We'll go. Oh, there's Patty. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and take the roll call, please.
Trustee Bachner,
Here.
Trustee Karji,
Here.
Trustee Vasquez,
Here.
Trustee Brennan,
Here.
Trustee Hennick,
Here.
Trustee O'Connell,
Here.
President Aducey.
Here. Okay, if I can get a motion and a second to approve remote participation, please.
I'll move to approve remote participation.
I'll second. Patty?
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is this voice again?
So I'm going to take a voice vote. All those in favor of remote participation, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, the next up is the Pledge of Allegiance. So bear with us if you can stand and look at the flag. I pledge. Okay, there you go. Can we get it? I don't know if you see it. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United States
of America.
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
for all.
Okay, very good. We almost were in sync.
We need a leader for that.
I tried. It's all up every 2 seconds behind. Okay. Okay, so citizens comment. Let's say we're back with our citizens. David Flint, are you still with us on the line? If you are, please *6.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Do you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, great. Am I up to speak,
Yes,
or
yes.
are you
I'm
just
sorry,
checking in
David.
on me?
Nope, you're up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and maybe, Madam President, just a point of record here that there are several of you that asked to speak to the Committee of the Whole and to the Village Board of Trustees. So, Mr. I know several of you, I think 6 of the 8 had done so. So your comments have already been received by the Village Board at the Committee of the Whole meeting, but you are still entitled to speak at the Village Board meeting should you so desire. So you're speaking to the same audience, the same group of people. I just want to be clear about that. So if you just wish to
Yes, sir.
stay on the line, you can do that as well.
Thank you, sir. Yes. I'll keep it short this time. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank
Great.
you.
Super. I really do appreciate all of the hard work gone into this process. It's entirely apparent that we all want what's best for everyone in our community. I really respect all of you involved in this process. This is America at its best here. You know, this is one of the reasons I stayed in River Forest, even though I'm underwater in a condo. I know in the end, I feel protected and considered valuable as a citizen, and I appreciate that. Previously, I had focused on several financially intangible and difficult societal aspects of the plan, but now I offer a more financially and regarding data and research, a quantitative thought regarding the point on, quote, diminishing the value of the neighboring properties. There are several studies out there, young and old, available to the committee, such as the one by Gabriel Alfelt and Daniel McMillan, published in 2018. It's called Tall Buildings and Land Values, Height and Construction Cost elasticities in Chicago from 1870 to 2010. One useful point in this study mentions cities with a more rigid zoning regime tends to increase the level of elasticity in the local market. In other words, if a muni like ours is amenable to small changes to zoning in limited amounts, the market will be much more forgiving in response. In fact, in 2000, overall, the elasticity was 45% for commercial buildings versus just 30% for residential buildings. So small changes we make that have a large impact on our affordability goals, honestly, they have a 70% chance of no effect at all. So these are things we can look at. Although academia can be boring, it can offer some points to discuss. So I encourage the use of external experts to study the state of affordable housing in our community, but not just ours, in concert with, for instance, Oak Park and our fairly new director there in the housing organization there. So thank you.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, David. Is Heidi on the line? Heidi Kesselston? Heidi? If you are, if you unmute your phone, *6. Okay. Well, we'll come back to Heidi. Deb, are you on the line? Deb Rolkstein, are you on the line? If you can just *6. Unmute. I might have lost everybody.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Deb.
Hi. Thanks. I'll just take a moment because I did really make most of my comments in the COW meeting, but I just want to say, based on some of the comments that came after mine, that it was intimated that perhaps I made a personal attack on John Housefield, which I did not. I know John. I like John. I worked with him in Leadership Lab, and certainly my not being a fan of this plan is not a personal attack on him. And also my comments about hearing in the Plan Commission meetings that it was noted that there are many creative ways, but not seeing them in the options. That was in my comments, and I don't know what those creative ways are really. I'm not a housing expert. I know we do have some in the community. Dan Lauber is an expert on affordable housing. So I don't know exactly what I was looking for there. I just was hoping to see some more new and different plans from the template. And again, that is not me leveling any charge. That is just saying that I was dissatisfied with the plan as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Okay, is Mark Shellstead still on the line? Mark?
Kathy?
Yes.
Oh, this is Heidi. I'm sorry, I got muted.
No worries. Okay, welcome, Heidi.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm not very good with this technology. So I'm here to represent Community of Congregations, and I have a brief letter that I'll read, and then I was really grateful that I dialed into the earlier meeting because it gave me some context and information, and I'm going to make some personal comments at the end of this letter. So I'm going to speak quickly because I know I don't have a lot of time. So President Izzucci and the village trustees, we're very grateful for your commitment and leadership, and we thank you for serving the village during this challenging time. We pray that each of you and your families are safe and well. In the past few months, the River Forest Village Board has repeatedly reached out to all residents, keeping us informed during the pandemic and offering assistance to seniors and vulnerable residents. This act of kindness speaks to who we are as a village community and who we want to be. We yearn to be good neighbors and to look out for others. We seek to live in a welcoming village, a village that is inclusive. That means we must offer real opportunities for those of limited financial means to reside in the village. We all know that there are people who work in the village who can't afford to live here. They help us in our schools, in our grocery stores, in our medical offices. I don't need to reiterate what other people have said. The lack of access to affordable housing in River Forest is a social justice concern, and that brings us to the importance of an affordable housing plan that is strong and effective. I think our strongest feeling right now is that we have not had sufficient time to learn about the plan, discuss the plan, and understand its implications. That is not to say that you did not offer those opportunities. That is to say that we are not ready. And I do think, having listened to the last 2 or 3 hours, whatever it's been, I think there's a real disconnect in communication here. And for that reason, if no other, I would seriously suggest that we delay a vote on the plan tonight. If you have the right plan, I will tell you right now that the community does not know it. But I'll continue with my letter and I'll finish with my comments again. We respectfully request that you do not approve the affordable housing plan at this time. We ask that you pause. We ask that you delay a vote on the plan and provide adequate time and information for the residents to understand and comment on the plan. And we respectfully request that you do not approve any new building or multi-unit housing contracts during this time of deliberation. Please do not bring the plan to a vote tonight. We're not ready. We want to let you, our elected officials, know where we stand on the details of this very important plan, and we need more time and information to make this happen. The letter is signed by Dr. Claire Noonan, who's the president of Community Congregation. She's a leader at Dominican University. There's 10 or 11 clergy who've signed, some representing Oak Park congregations. Many of their congregants live in River Forest. I'm a River Forest resident. I've been around for 25 years. I live at 1001 Jackson. There's other clergy from River Forest and River Forest congregations who support the letter as well. Here's what I'll say, having listened to the last few hours. It's obvious that you all worked incredibly hard on this plan. Here's the concern. The concern is that you're not centering people, that you're centering economics. When I heard the gentleman from Opportunity Knox speak early in the evening, and when I think about affordable housing, I think about people. I think about how many people of limited financial means can we accommodate in the village. And I was stunned when the deliberation began in the COW meeting, and it moved so quickly to economics, and we're trying to comply with these requirements, and a developer won't do this, and a developer won't do that. And we stopped talking about people. And if I was a gentleman from Opportunity Knox, I would be pretty devastated. I would feel like nobody heard what I had to say. And the fact that you want to retain maximum flexibility so you can be nimble whenever something comes up means that by definition, we are not codifying a policy. And what we're looking for on the other side of that argument is a policy that expresses our values and provides some protection to ensure that we will center people in the argument. If in fact, through all of this incredible work that you've done and the diligence that you've done, you really have come up with the best or a really excellent plan for River Forest, then I suggest that we need more time to absorb that information. And we need a better campaign of getting that information out to the community, because otherwise there are going to be a lot of very upset people thinking that we missed the opportunity to express our values in this policy at this time. So I want to thank you all for everything that you're doing. It's been a terrible time in our country. People are stressed and upset. And I think this looks like an opportunity to do something good right now. And I know that the clergy are focused on this right now. They feel like it's a social justice issue. It's a racial equity issue. It would be really best to get everybody on the side of this is the plan that we want to support. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. And one question, I understand there was a community congregations, a rally yesterday, and I was not aware of it. So if any way I can get on your mailing list or your text,
Love to.
Please let me know.
I will do that. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay,
Thank you.
Heidi, thank you. I don't know if we have Mark on the line still. Mark Shellstead. Okay, I'll keep calling Mark. Dan, are you on? If you are, you're up, and if you can just star 6.
I think I'm here.
Yep, okay, welcome.
I think my fingerprints are here. Again, I'd like to express my appreciation to the time and energy that the Plan Commission put into this. and I appreciate how much thought particularly some commissioners put into it, who sought some changes in this and obtained a few changes. But the bottom line is that, and I just don't understand why some people are so afraid of these recommendations. I don't understand why it is conceivably okay to basically use, if they're using Wilmette as a model, a 16-year-old model, when so much has happened in affordable housing since then, including community land banks, local co-ops, mutual housing associations, and a slew of other tools that are more modern and more usable. I don't understand why a community would want to adopt a plan that completely misrepresents the nature of housing cost burdens, as explained in the letter that you received from Sarah Pratt, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Enforcement and Programs and Senior Advisor to the Assistant Secretary at HUD, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, during the Obama administration. I don't understand why you would want to use a plan that has faulty data on the cost of home ownership, taken from the American Community Survey, which is notoriously unreliable for the cost of home ownership, when communities can use data from the county assessor or from the multiple listing service. And I did provide John with an email with that information on March 7th. I don't know why you're so opposed to having a recommendation to adopt an inclusionary zoning ordinance. The fact is, with over 800 communities in the country that have done this, developers like certainty. And an inclusionary zoning ordinance, well written, gives them that certainty. So they know how many units they'd have to provide, how much profit they can make, how many additional market rate units they can build. Developers do not like going into a community and having to negotiate everything. They prefer certainty. It makes the community more acceptable. I am impressed that the Plan Commission was able to do this in just 4 meetings. I have never heard of a community anywhere in the country that was able to do it with come up with an affordable housing plan in four meetings, but that is impressive. I urge you, however, to check the minutes, and you'll see, regarding the comments and suggestions that people made, there was virtually no discussion of them. Check the minutes, listen to the recording. If this plan had one of my fingerprints on it, it'd be a very different plan, much more responsive to the needs of River Forest people with modest incomes, filled with a lot more data to let us get to the real need that exists in the community. And I do appreciate the efforts of David Crosby and the Plan Commission, but I think that it would be extraordinarily prudent on the part of this village board to vote no on this plan and come up with an original plan. And look not just at the plans that were written to meet the state law, but look at real affordable housing plans that cities have written because they're trying to do the right thing. They're much more expensive than these, the Highland Park plan being a good example. Even the Lake Forest plan, I think, was 41 pages with much more information in it. We deserve better. This is a good, great community. We deserve a top-notch affordable housing plan. If you adopt this as it is, we will have a plan that fails, that includes questionable data, incorrect interpretation of cost-burdened housing, and no teeth. And it needs teeth. And I hope that you will have the prudence to vote no on this plan tonight and get it done right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Is Megan Casatello still on the line? Megan? Casatello, got that right.
I'm here. I'm here.
Hi, Megan.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to thank you for addressing the metrics that I asked about earlier, everyone. And I want to thank the Planning Commission and everyone who's worked so hard on this. I won't belabor the points I made earlier. I did want to mention that when we were talking about partners, I have seen plans written by UIC's Nathalie P. Voorhees Center for Neighborhood and Community Improvement. So if we're at a loss for where to look for a partner in this endeavor, that's a place we can start. We are blessed with a lot of urban planning universities in this area, so I'm sure it's not the only place we could look. The only comment I really wanted to add to this was that losing an affordable housing unit has a real human face and a real human cost. And just before we started this meeting, a resident reached out to me and asked me to share with you that she's a renter who has been now twice displaced from her home in River Forest. First, she and her child, who is disabled, had to move to Forest Park, and that her child had trouble continuing school. They were able to move back to River Forest, and now they live on Bonnie Brae in a rental unit. Their rental unit is part of a proposed development that's upcoming, and they will be displaced again. So when we're talking about this, each unit, each of these numbers is not just a number. It's not 27 units, it's 27 families. And I just want us to consider that as we're thinking about what it means to talk about affordable housing. It's real stories behind every single number. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is Josh Ehart on the line?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you. Again, thank you for the work that has been done. I would urge a postponement of the vote until there's time to add sufficient detail to address some of the challenges that have been laid out by numerous people. One of the things that struck me was and I appreciated, was the depth of conversation around some of the broader term impacts of how zoning laws and zoning rules and regulations and the planning process interact with a plan like this. It was very helpful in illuminating the complexity of creating something that makes sense. What that says to me is the plan that's in front of us is not detailed enough to address those complexities. So I would urge a postponement to work through how to make those systems work better together. Allowing the sort of the space or lack of specificity in the process because it'll come up in another review process, I think is basically, it sounds like passing the buck, and you're requiring a different body to do the work. And they may have different motivations to the point about families versus economics. So I urge a postponement to take a more thoughtful and thorough look at this plan. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Josh. Is Megan Hodge on? Megan?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I shared some thoughts earlier tonight. I won't repeat them all. But as I did share during the Committee of the Whole meeting earlier, my husband and I did send a letter to all of you today expressing our significant concern with the current version of the Affordable Housing Plan. We believe that a comprehensive, equitable, and inclusive housing plan should align with and support the broader River Forest Village values and strategic objectives. And the reason we do that is for a community to truly be inclusive, one that welcomes, respects, and values the diversity of its holistic population. So this is the human face on our community. Inclusivity has to be integrated strategically and with intention throughout the entire fabric of the community. So that is from policies to plans to words, and that translates to our actions. As we heard during the Committee of the Whole call earlier this evening, there have been a number of strong recommendations for amendments, concerns expressed, and considerations for clarified data and metrics that can be incorporated to enhance the current version of this affordable housing plan, so that it is a version that is intentional in its inclusivity. These recommendations do not in any way negate the significant and much appreciated hard work by the Plan Commission. It is truly clear, especially after all of the discussion this evening, how much time has been spent thus far in developing this plan. However, and I do say this tongue in cheek, but hard work in and of itself does not merit a vote this evening. There is still more work to be done to refine the current version of this plan into one that is robust, equitable, and inclusive, and reflects the values, integrity, and inclusivity of the Village of River Forest. Despite some of the voiced concerns by several of the board members that a more comprehensive plan might prove prohibitive to development in our community, a thorough and thoughtful plan, one that provides more clarity, guidance, and that incorporates key metrics and benchmarks, will ultimately not be prohibitive. It will be pragmatic. In fact, a refined and clarified and more intentional plan will likely avoid pitfalls, conflict, and reputational damage to our community down the road. During my comments on the earlier call this evening, I quoted the last paragraph from President Aducci's inclusive and important message to the community in response to last week's horrific hate crime, in which she references how community and livability are important to all of us, how living together without biases and hatred is important to all of us, and how, without this ongoing conversation, we're not a community at all. Well, now is this time. It's time for us, the collective community, along with our board, to ensure that our actions reflect our commitment to inclusion, equity, and livability. And we can do so this evening in postponing the vote on the current version of the Affordable Housing Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Okay. Okay. I don't know if David Zerberoff, are you on the line, David? I don't know if David is. Bob, do you know David? Is David on Keystone?
He's connecting right now.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yeah, I'm guessing he's joining the conversation for our later item.
Well, I'm going to ask him if he'd like to talk now, or because he is the only one for Keystone flooding.
Hi, guys. This is David here. I am on the phone. You can hear me?
Yep, we can.
He's not the only one on Keystone. There's two of us.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, David. You're up.
Yeah. So I was calling in to listen about the Keystone flooding issue, and so I was just waiting patiently to learn if there's been any progress or resolution to move forward with any improvements.
So, okay, because you were up on speaking public comment. So if you'd like, we're probably going to get to it a little bit later, and we'd be happy to send you a text or let you know that when we're at that point in the agenda, if you'd like, David, it might be easier, or you can stay on the line and listen to more of the Planning Commission discussion.
I'll stay on.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, that concludes then our comments for the regular village board meeting. So I will now ask elected. Yeah.
So I understand there were perhaps some residents who wanted to make comments still towards the affordable housing plan. I understand Carrie Cragen in particular was somebody who submitted a letter to be read into the record.
Patty, we will be here all night if we read all the records, the letters that were sent.
No,
I think they are part of the public record.
No, I'm sorry. I disagree. Here's the thing. She's a resident whose voice matters and should be heard. Our policy pretty much has always been that we are not going to turn speakers away. That's why we actually went to having a policy to try and limit the length of comments as a way to be respectful.
So Patty, I'm not disagreeing with you. The only problem is we got like 30 emails today, and
no, she specifically asked. She's an important voice in this conversation.
Okay.
She did.
Fair. I mean, here, we'll read it into the record. Lisa, could you please bring
right now?
Could you please bring it up and we'll read it? Go ahead. I'm okay. Give us a couple minutes and we'll read it.
Dear Trustees, Carrie Cragen, 914 Bonnie Bray. As a member of the Plan Commission, I would like to comment on the Affordable Housing Plan before you. First, I would like to thank Chairman Crosby and Assistant Village Administrator Lisa Shiner for their work with the Commission. Second, I was unaware during our deliberations as a committee that the draft document that we were working on was, parentheses, allegedly a nearly identical plan from another community that was over a decade old. If that is the case, I am disappointed that no attribution was made, as such time was spent discussing needed the changes to the negative tone that the draft plan had towards affordable housing. In short, I feel like we started with an outdated negative plan and spent much time trying to improve it. Affordable housing benefits all of us and is an important part of our community. We should strive to have more than the state mandated 10%. Affordable housing allows parents to downsize their homes when the kids leave, widowed seniors to remain in the support systems of their friends, lifelong volunteers to continue contributing to our community, and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities to remain in the neighborhoods that support and cherish them. If every new dwelling unit in our community is a large, expensive home or condo, only the wealthiest families with school-aged children might justify the cost of living here, which could further overburden District 90 and its remaining 3 buildings. Our school district's limited space is dependent on the percentage of resident taxpayers with school-aged children. Thus, the diversity of our housing stock and the diversity of demographics also strengthens our schools. I voted in favor of the draft plan presented to the Village Board of Trustees because I want the village to affirm the value of affordable housing to our village and to move forward with the recommendations to change zoning and incentives to retain and encourage affordable housing throughout the village. As 70% of the village is zoned for single-family housing, amending the village code to allow for accessory dwelling units could help us reach many goals. Allowing ADUs not only provides more affordable housing, but could enable some cost-burdened villagers and or seniors to afford to stay in their homes and or house their adult children, grandparents, home health care, or child care providers. Last, I still feel the plan could be much stronger in requiring new large developments to include a certain percentage of affordable and or integrated supportive housing, specifically as described in the request from our very own Opportunity Knox, in parens, see letter from Mr. Carmody. I hope your future actions will ensure that the affordable housing plan is not just a required box that we needed to check in order to satisfy a state requirement. Please further strengthen the village's commitment to protecting, retaining, and expanding our affordable housing options in River Forest. Thank you for your public service. Sincerely, Carrie Cragen.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And then Phyllis, I'm sorry I didn't have you on the list, but please feel free to talk. Phyllis, just here you go.
Okay, I got it. That's the second time. Okay. I'll be very quick. I'm not going to repeat what I said before. I appreciate all this discussion. It's very illuminating. It's very helpful. John, you responded to my comments about that the plan should not say that there's a risk that the property values would be diminished. It's in here. You said you meant sort of the character, and if the building is too high, it would change something. You have, and possibly diminish the value of the neighboring properties. I don't know what else that means except that the property values would go down. I think that's another way of saying that. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what that means. So I don't think it belongs in this plan. And may I also say, after listening to David talking about, or John talking about the charge from the board to the Plan Commission was to draw up a plan that would meet the act requirement. That's the minimum of what we should have been doing. We shouldn't have, that is indeed checking off a box. What you board should now do is to go back to the Plan Commission and ask for a plan that meets the need of our times, that meets the need that our times demand of us, and that reflects our values to community, to each other, and I mean the very broad each other. Thank you, that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Phyllis. All right. We don't have John, so to address it. So is John on? John Houser. No? All right, we'll go on. Okay, that concludes our comments from the residents. So we'll move on to elected officials and comments announcements.
Kathy, I'm here real quick if
Okay.
you want me to address Phyllis.
Yeah, I didn't want, Phyllis brought it up twice, and I think it's worthy to address it.
I think it's important, and I want to be real specific about this. When the only place we talk about diminished property values and she read the second half of a sentence, and I appreciate her attention to detail. This was brought up at a Plan Commission meeting, and myself, Chairman Crosby, and at least one other Plan Commission instantly stopped the speaker who made that assumption. The sentence is referring specifically to if buildings are allowed to go higher or be bigger or more intense, it could have a diminished impact on surrounding property values. It does not talk about the use of affordable housing as a use. The plan does not talk about affordable housing diminishing property values. That specific sentence is the end of a sentence, the first half of which is talking about allowing buildings to be taller and higher and more intense, and we have to do that carefully so that does not diminish adjacent property values. This came up with the comp plan when we looked at raising the commercial height of properties on Madison Street. Regardless of use, adjacent residential property owners said that could really diminish our property because of light and air and shadows and other impact. It had nothing to do with affordable housing. This is the height and size of buildings. So the only place it talks about diminished property values is referencing to building height. It is not referencing affordable housing. We were careful no one on the Plan Commission nor I thinks that affordable housing diminishes property values of nearby or adjacent properties. That talks specifically about allowing buildings to be too high. We have to be careful about that. That's all that is. So I appreciate Phyllis's attention to detail. She came to meetings, and I appreciate it. I just wanted to clarify it.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. John. Called you Jeff. What do I know? All right. Let's go on to the elected official comments and announcements. So I'll start with Erica, if you wouldn't mind, Erica. I think she's here.
I don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement, but I want to remind people why I give this acknowledgement every time. And it's because we want to make sure that that I remember that the decisions that we make at the board are impactful to so many people, and we go back to the history of Indigenous people and how they had the land first, and we took it from them, and that's a real fact of American history. And we have some other real facts that we've had to contend with for realize in the past couple of weeks. So I'll start now with, as we begin, we are mindful that we hold these meetings on lands that was once and still inhabited by Indigenous people, including the Ojibwa, the Chippewa, the Menominee, the Potawatomi nations, and more. We remember our nation's history and honor the Native people as stewards of this land that was colonized, and the rural forest continues to be a place many people from diverse backgrounds live and gather. So I want to acknowledge the deaths of George Floyd, a Black man, Breonna Taylor, a Black woman, and Tony McDade, a Black trans man. And they were killed by the police in their community. They weren't the first people to be killed. They won't be the last Black people to be killed. But we see now, and there's a collective cry from our nation, and I think we can say there's a collective cry locally as well, that we must do better, and that the systems that we have in place do not work for everybody. And that it's incumbent upon all of us to look inward and how we contribute to those systems that don't work for Black people, and worse yet, get them killed. I want to thank the Rural Forest Police and the Village Administration for their work in the past couple of weeks, for everything they've done, for what they did to help the woman who was attacked and slurred at our at a Jewel and Starbucks late last week. And we know that we can be a better community. And that starts with our policies and our processes and our systems. And we have to look at them. And this is a moment in time where we can do that, and where everyone is doing that. Kim Fox talked about the casualness and acceptance of racism. And if you haven't heard that, it's about maybe 10 minutes or so. It's worth a listen to. And you can see that with, and she makes this point, you can see that with the police with George Floyd, and how they knew they were being videotaped, and yet they continued because they did not believe that there would be any repercussions for them. And similarly, the taping of the tape of the woman who was attacked here in River Forest, that white man who's a resident of River Forest knew he was being taped and thought that he could get away with what he was doing. Obviously, that's not right, but we need to stand up for Black and brown people, minorities, and those who are marginalized, and start to look at the big, small, and micro ways that we need to do that. So I just want to talk a little, I've talked a little bit about that. I did want to also talk about this weekend and how I was able to coordinate with the help of John Pape, Helen Kwan, and Kathy, and with the help of volunteers like Katie and Rez and Patty, from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a Saturday. We spent some time giving away free masks. They were reusable cloth masks, and we gave them out to people who live right next to me. So there are 54, I guess they probably would be considered affordable housing units, condos and apartments to the north of me, and 54 townhomes to the south of me. And that was wonderful because we don't often get a chance, especially during a pandemic, to know what's going on inside each of those homes and to see how they're doing. And so we were able to hear from, let me get my numbers. We were able to distribute 130 masks. We were able to touch 45 families, and we got 31 new signups for the e-newsletter and our call updates. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
We were able to speak to retired professionals, young families, a nurse at UIC, a data analyst, a principal at a school in Chicago, a medical billing professor or a professional, someone who had an immune deficiency, another person who lives with his ailing mom and takes care of her, a psychologist at a CPS school, someone who works at a food depository, someone who works with the School for the Blind in Chicago, someone who works at our Costco pharmacy, a warehouse worker, and someone who's out of work now, so he's doing Uber. These are the lives that we've been talking about for the past few hours. These are the lives that are going to be affected. And I'm just so grateful that we got an opportunity to talk to these people this weekend, my neighbors, and to be able to do something. They were so gratified that the village cared for them and were looking out for them, and that we were providing them not just the face masks, but information on the census, which most of them said they had already completed, which I loved. I was thrilled by that. We gave them information about how to wear the masks, how to wash them, how to make them if they needed more. We gave them information on COVID and provided resources that can be hard to find in Spanish all on one page that came from my discussions with Director Patty Garcia at Chuy Garcia's office. It was a page of links that can be really tough for people to find if you're Spanish speaking. So it was a wonderful day. It was a perfect day for it. And I thank everybody who helped me out in making it so successful.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Erica. Very nice. Who's next, Erica? Tom. Tom Kirch.
First up, Dirk. We've been meeting we've been trying to have weekly meetings now because we're trying to get the survey done. We have a meeting again tomorrow. One of the questions that I have for all the members of the board and for Kathy is whether or not there's objection to using a mailing to distribute information about the survey. And Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it would cost about $2,000. And the goal would be to do a mailing to all the residents of River Forest to advise them of where the location of the survey and to drive traffic towards it. Am I right, Sarah?
Tom, I think that costed $3,000. So it's $1,500 to make the postcards, and then it's $1,500 for postage.
Oh.
So our other option was to do an insert within the water bill, but the problem with that is obviously not every resident gets a water bill. So I think that the mailing is a more effective way of reaching everyone in the village. But you know, I don't want to put Eric on the spot. I just want to make sure that everyone's okay with our spending $3,000 to do this. If anyone has an objection, note it now. Or next up, I want to compliment Kathy, Eric, everyone on the village staff for an incredible trying 3 months, but especially an incredible trying last week. I thought it was handled professionally, and they did a great job. And I just can't believe the amount of stuff they've had to deal with in the past 3 months. And I admire them for holding up. I want to do a special shout out to Sarah because she stuck with me with the Deer Committee, and we've been turning things around quickly. Last week we had a meeting on Tuesday. We're having another one tomorrow. And Sarah was able to get the agenda out as well as incorporating changes that were done to the survey and the minutes by Friday morning, which is when it had to be done by the OPA. So I genuinely appreciate you, Sarah. I know it's a pain in the butt, but you're really a credit to the village.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're meeting tomorrow, and the goal is, as I said, to get the survey done and get it out. And then at that point, we will begin collating a conversation with Tim Pruce. He's going to be appearing. Tim Bruce, the Deer guy, will be appearing, or will be phoning in rather, to the meeting tomorrow to answer everyone's questions and give us his opinion about where the survey currently is. So hopefully by the time we meet again, I'll be able to report that we sent the survey out.
Well, very good. So the good news, Sarah, is Tom won't object to your raise. So there you go.
I might actually.
That was a joke, Tom. Okay, Rez.
Okay, thank you. I also want to echo Trustee Faulkner and Trustee Karji's big thank you for our police department, our village staff, particularly not only for the past couple of months, but particularly on this week with the Jewel incident. I can, besides not only getting a quick resolution, but also more importantly, the communication that was going out was terrific. I've heard nothing but good compliments from at least the residents that I've talked to about how good how good the village was in releasing the e-news, Facebook postings, etc., just letting people know what was going on. So kudos to all of you. Next, I wanted to give a brief update. The Mayor's Caucus, Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, Age-Friendly Communities Collaborative met on June the 4th. Kathy and I both attended there. Basically, we talked about the preliminary research on what other collaboratives are doing, age-friendly collaboratives are doing. And we also talked about creating a repository. So not only a repository possibly of what other collaboratives are doing, but also a collection of what our collaborative is doing with the various villages, et cetera, as it relates to aging in place communities. We received a report on mobility and transit for relating to our older adults. We also received a report from the Illinois Department on Aging regarding the Illinois state's response to the COVID-19 circumstances. We also received a report from Age Guide regarding what other aging agencies' responses were to COVID and assisting our seniors. And that was pretty much it. Individual municipalities talked about what they were working. Of course, I took the opportunity to gloat about our River Forest Task Force regarding servicing our aging community seniors in our neighborhood, not only providing and making grocery deliveries, but also in providing and making masks to service our community. So that went well. Last but not least, we have the just another Wabi Sabi Film Festival. If you recall last year, that's free films that are being offered at the Lake Theater in downtown Oak Park for our seniors. Of course, with the COVID-19, we won't be able to offer that in person, but there will be free digital screening that will be coming later this month. So it's going to be obviously offered through the internet. So so more to come with that. And last but not least, regarding our Aging in Place Ad Hoc Committee, we will be scheduling a meeting sometime this month. We're still coordinating that. We started with the preliminaries with our members. I will say, though, that I'm not sure where we're going to go with this affordable housing plan. However, our committee is already dedicated and focused on issues really regarding seniors. We already talked preliminary positive themes about the ADUs. And that's with my past experience, not only on the Age-Friendly Collaborative, but also when I was at dealing with other aging in place members and community members. So we're looking at housing, we're going to be looking at transportation, we're going to be looking at the ADUs and also zoning. I will say that I'm looking forward to the members I have as well on that. And believe you me, I'm not the expert on this committee, but we have a number of experts, well, I would consider experts in there. So again, from my perspective, we're going to be looking at a lot of these issues that are going to be touching upon affirmative housing plan issues, as well as zoning issues, et cetera. So we're going to move ahead. All right, thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, Katie. Oh,
President,
Kathleen.
may I?
Yes, of course. I am so sorry. I do that all the time. You should just
I'm
kick
sorry,
me.
Katie. I'm just going to jump in briefly. Yep. I wanted to echo Trustee Bachner's, Karji's, and Trustee Vasquez's congratulations, appreciation for our village staff, President Ducey, during these very difficult times. I'm so grateful, and I have so many community members that come to me asking for suggestions, help, ideas, and I've every time been able to direct them to someone, and they've reported nothing but the best in their interactions with everyone. So I'm just wanted to share that, and additionally, happy Pride Month.
Yep. Thank you. It's true. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. Katie?
Yeah. First, I want to congratulate Sustainability Commissioner Shannon Roberts and her husband Ben on the birth of their beautiful baby boy, Clark Sullivan Roberts, who was born in the midst of worldwide upheaval. It's nice to have some good news, and I know that Clark is bringing Shannon and his family a lot of joy right now. These past 2 weeks have been heartbreaking, alarming, and all-encompassing. On the heels of George Floyd's killing and too many others losing their lives due to confounding police brutality around the country, we experienced hate crime and battery here in our own town. I believe that Kathy Aducey, our village president, and Jim O'Shea, our police chief's response and public statements were spot on, timely, proactive, and effective. Thank you for that. And to both of you and Eric Palm and the rest of his staff who have really worked tirelessly during this challenging time with additional issues including a broken water main and fires to handle. We are at a crossroads. Someone told me this week that she just wanted things to go back the way they were. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and assume she meant pre-COVID, because I do not want us to go back the way we were. Racial inequality permeates everything, much if not everything, in our society. Not just on the policing side, it shows itself in economic and health disparities, and at its base, in housing and education. We're not going to solve this tonight because it's not just a tricky issue, it's likely the trickiest. But we can take some steps tonight that will make how our village works more transparent, allow someone of limited means at this point in their life to enjoy the incredible benefits that our village and its residents offer, and help our residents engage in a discussion that is so painful that many of us, myself included, often choose not to have it. As President Aducey said in her public letter on June 4th, we will not tolerate hate in this town. Livability is important to all of us, and we will take proactive steps on how we can live together without bias. But River Forest residents are asking for more. Releasing a statement isn't enough. We have received many emails and texts from you this week, asking our village leaders to bend the curve of inequality and outline a course of action for River Forest to do that. Asking for signage that River Forest welcomes racial diversity, and asking for a village statement that River Forest condemns harassment. And those three requests were received before the June 3rd hate crime and battery in our town. We've also received emails and texts asking for an ordinance against racial profiling by police, asking for a review of River Forest Police, including racial makeup of the force, recruitment policies and review process, and where our force can improve, suggesting education and policing approaches that de-escalate tensions and reduce violence with links for information about that, suggesting education and how to understand the laws and policies that govern police conduct with links for information, and suggesting education on race, economic disparity, and equal justice with links to articles, websites, and donations, places to donate. That's why, together with Trustee Bachner, I'm recommending tonight that the village create a forum of residents and other stakeholders, including a representative from our police force, to discuss all of these issues, research how we're doing, receive input and reports about concerns, and provide recommendations to the board for how River Forest can improve. I've spoken with President Aducey about this, and I believe she is supportive. Trustee Bachner has spoken with Chief O'Shea, and he's on board as well. With the board's support, Erica and I will work to prepare a proposed framework for this forum, potentially in the form of a task force. We believe that this is our collective responsibility to address these issues now. We do not want to look back in 6, 9, 12 months from now and see that we have gone back to the way things were. We hope that the rest of the board supports this idea, and if you do, we report back at our next village board meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. And we will talk more about that. But you have Jim O'Shea and my commitment, and we'll talk more about that on the forum. Patty.
Okay, first of all, I would like to also echo previous comments in regards to response to COVID, in response to the horrendous action of one of our residents in the Jewel. We cannot tolerate this kind of behavior. We have to stand up to it, and as has been said by some of the trustees and residents, this is our time to take action and put action to the words that we said, as many people have already cited as far as the statements that have gone out. I want to go and say now, Katie and Erica, I do support this effort of reviewing our policies and reviewing things that are going on with this forum you're suggesting. I absolutely support that. I want to thank Erica for her very thoughtful idea and execution of the afternoon. I mean, it was an enjoyable afternoon. I was very happy to have been invited and a part of that, and I applaud you for that effort, for having that forethought to cover so many bases to reach our residents, our neighbors, our friends, fellow humans. How are you doing? Let's give you information. What do you need? We need more of that kind of action. And so thank you so very much for having that forethought and willingness to make that happen. I would actually, and I know you've already talked about it, the idea of replicating that in other areas of the village to try and connect with some of these buildings that may feel a little disconnected compared to some blocks and neighborhoods. So certainly something I think we should explore. So I want to take a minute to give an illustration for everybody who is listening right now and people who will be listening. A stark contrast to two things we had going on sort of parallel. Two topics that the village has been addressing in a parallel time frame. In September, we were tasked and had the conversation to start the ball rolling on an affordable housing plan. We had a conversation September 9th around the idea of having another expert weigh in on a plan that we would come back with, because a resident raised the concern that perhaps the consultant we had didn't have the experience. We spent probably 20 minutes discussing what this might look like and left that public discussion agreeing that we would have a second opinion on that. That process for the affordable housing plan then moved to the first commission meeting in October that was set up to be a workshop for the Plan Commission to discuss thoughts, ideas, get an understanding about affordable housing plan, talk about some direction that they might want to have with this plan. Let me be clear that at that meeting, and I appreciate that schedules don't always allow for everyone to be at each of these meetings, but there were 4 commission members participating in that workshop that was going to help guide this plan. The plan doesn't come back to the commission until mid-January for discussion. It was clear that commission members had lots of thoughtful questions, lots of dialogue. I don't dispute that. They absolutely were wanting to get this right and asking really good questions. I was in the audience at that meeting being happy at some of the questions that were being asked, because they were things that I was thinking as I was sitting there. It was clear that at least 1 or 2 of them specifically were looking for information to include in this plan, which is why things went back to the drawing board and came back to them for a March meeting. With the pandemic, meetings really couldn't happen in April, so that's why we had the delay there. And things that were discussed at the March meeting, I'm sorry, maybe losing the time frame here. So they had the January meeting, went to draft, came back to the March meeting. There was more discussion, more changes requested, couldn't meet in April, and met again in May to come back with the recommendation for the board. I want people to be clear of the timeline here. We're talking from September to May, 8 months. We're talking 3 of those months, nothing happened with our commission. I appreciate commission members may have been working on their own. I appreciate that perhaps our consultant and staff may have had some conversations, but in terms of public opportunities to be able to hear discussion and to hear what was going on, you're talking over an 8-month period, 4 meetings, 5 if you include the village board meeting, September 9th, maybe a little bit, 5.5 if you include our village board meeting January 27th, where I make the recommendation after having sat through that first January meeting and recognized that it was clear that commission members wanted some direction and might want to know a better idea of where we want to go with an affordable housing plan. And so I made the recommendation that our board have a discussion, have residents be able to hear that discussion, allow time for everyone to absorb what is clearly being illustrated as a very tough topic, right? There are so many things to consider. There are so many things we should be looking at and discussing, right? And so I made the suggestion that we have 1 meeting before we take a vote. I want to be clear that my position as a village trustee is not to make these suggestions with the idea of checking off a box to say we've had X number of meetings. I make these suggestions to have multiple meetings and allow time for village residents to be able to hear our discussions before voting, so that there is more light of day between these meetings, so that everybody involved can think about what is being discussed and said, right? And so the situation we're in right now today is that we scheduled a meeting at 5:30. And this was going to be our meeting, and the first time that was supposed to be when residents could hear the village board discuss what we wanted in a plan and to hear questions and answers to things that would help inform them on whether or not they felt comfortable that this was a good plan. We should have come back a second night to be able to have everybody digest everything that was just said at this 5:30 meeting, be able to think about questions they might have had based on what other people said, based on things that our consultant or trustees have said, and be able to have time to formulate those questions at another meeting that they could weigh in again before we vote. We have the process of inviting people to our meetings to make comments. If we make the assumption that once we get a recommendation from a commission, that we should just go with that commission recommendation because they worked so hard and were thoughtful, and I'm not saying they weren't, but then why do we even offer public comments prior to that if we don't allow the time to be able to even incorporate any of those comments into the plan? So now that was the time frame of the affordable housing plan. 4 meetings over an 8-month period that, as I said, did not necessarily mean active working with our commission. Now let's take a look at the time frame of the DEER discussion, which started about the same time in the fall. We had a meeting and discussed at our board table and had opportunity for residents to weigh in at 4 different meetings. At the November meeting, we actually had an agreement of what we were going to do with this process. Residents left with the understanding that we were going to follow a process. They come back to the December meeting or hear after the December meeting that has not been the process that we're going to perhaps have, right? And so this conversation around do we have a deer task force or not, this whole topic of deer ran our November meeting, December meeting, January, and even into our February meeting to finally finalize a deer task force of 13 residents compared to 4 that started the discussion on what our affordable housing plan should look like, compared to our 7, which would have just been the commission in and of itself. We have a task force of 13 residents. They have, since the creation of that task force, have had at least 4 or 5 meetings. They will have who knows how many between now and when a recommendation is due back to our board in September. Way more than we have allowed for this conversation about humans, about our residents, about our neighbors, about what's doing right in making a stance and sharing our values as far as what we want to see as a community when we talk about being one of the leaders in breaking down systemic racism and policies, right? I know from listening to those meetings that there have even been subcommittees that have gotten together to further discuss and do some work around this topic. I know that over the course of at least 2 meetings, there was lots of discussion around which sample survey are we going to use as the basis of the survey that we want to use for River Forest. To then find out that there was a plan that was used as the template for our affordable housing plan without any sort of recognition or dialogue around, is this the plan we even want to use as the basis of our affordable housing plan? No recognition of that. When I went back after hearing the situation we were in and re-listening to the starts of those meetings in October and January and hearing the conversations around and the dialogue, it was not at all clear that anybody recognized this as the starting off point to start this plan. There was one point in October where it was, John even says, this will be easy. I can have something drafted in a week and bring it back to you. That draft was dated 11/11. And then the committee didn't meet until January. So again, this idea that we would devote so much staff time, resident time, community engagement around the deer, which I do feel is important, which is the comments I made. But the idea when you contrast this, for anybody with a straight face to say that we have done enough around this conversation and we're ready to vote. One of the commenters in the 5:30 meeting said a comment as if, you know, we followed this process and somehow this isn't enough. Because it's not enough. We agreed in January to follow a process of scheduling a COW meeting for our board and following it with a second meeting. The pandemic did not dismiss that process that we publicly agreed to. It only delayed it. When I received an email from our village president that there was no time deadlines on the 3 recommendations we voted on or attempted to vote on at May 26th meeting, why we're in a situation that we feel compelled to rush this process with this arbitrary date of June 8th that has been set, that I have yet to ever hear any sort of reason why this needs to be set. I can't even believe this is the situation that we're in. We have all been elected to represent our community, to be the voice of our residents. The way we have handled this process in our last 2 meetings that have done such a disservice to any sort of community engagement and involvement, the idea that we are now at 9:15 and we still have a very robust conversation we should be having around affordable housing. We have residents who are waiting to hear about a very serious concern with flooding on their homes on Keystone. The very idea that we set these two meetings back to back, I just find so disrespectful and so unfair to all of our residents.
Okay. All right. Can we finish? I mean, I want to make sure we get to all this. So, anything else, Patty?
I guess I would like to ask you, Kathy, why have we set this date, June 8th, as the date that we absolutely have to vote on this plan? Why is it that we had this back-to-back meeting that made anybody being able to review any of the information that was provided for this plan in such a short turnaround time without any time for reflection?
Patty, it was agreed to at our last meeting. No opposition. Feel free to go back to the recording. So we are here now, and I think we should allow us to get to that part of the meeting so that we can have a conversation around it. So I ask if you're finished. If not, continue. But in respect to everybody else in the meeting here, I'd like to move on to Bob. But we did it with the unanimous vote.
Well, I want to go on the record that that date was established before coming into the meeting. I want to go on the record that I do not support the process we've been following here, and I also want to apologize to all of our residents. This is so unfair.
All right. Thank you, Patty. Bob?
I was going to start out with something, and I'm going to stick to my guns and say with it, and I'm going to come back in response to some of Patty's comments. I want to express my sincere sadness, dismay, the events that occurred last Wednesday in the Jewel parking lot. I want to apologize to the victim that happened in our town, but I also want to congratulate the chief of police, his staff, and Kathy for acting quickly to bring this under control. I'm going to give you a little bit of history just for a second. April 1968, I lived at the corner of Harvey and Jackson. And in April of 68, Dr. King was killed. And the west side of Chicago went up in fire. In June of 68, we lost Senator Kennedy. And in August of 68, we had the Democratic National Convention where we had riots. I had the opportunity to be downtown in Chicago as a 10-year-old boy with my father, going to a luncheon at the Hilton, my father explaining to me what had transpired. I want to reach out to our residents and ask them to talk to their kids, explain to them why this goes on. This is for the democratic process, people expressing their views. The opportunistic looting of businesses throughout the country is not what this was all about. This was about people expressing concern for what was going on in our country. So I encourage and I urge our parents to talk to their kids and explain it to them. I want to jump to some of Patty's comments. And I'm the last two meetings, I've been very disappointed. You seem to be watching the clock on this stuff, Patty. And I don't believe it's fair. I don't believe it's fair to David Crosby and to the members of the Plan Commission that the evenings that they put in, that you want to rush this through. Okay? We have established agendas for these meetings. Okay? We are elected to run this village. Okay? We are here to give direction to the village administrator and his staff to execute. Okay? And we were here till 12:30 last time. And if we have to be here till 12:30 again tonight, if we get it done and we get it done right, then that's fine. Nobody has put a timeline on this. Nobody has put a time to when we're going to talk about something. Okay? I apologize to David, who's my neighbor, that this is going to take a little bit of time, but we're talking about serious issues here. Okay? If you want to call a special meeting, then talk to Greg Smith to figure out how you do that. But to constantly put pressure on us to answer these questions and rush through a meeting, I don't believe is fair.
I have to respond to that because that is categorically not what I
It's not your opportunity to respond to a question while another trustee is commenting.
All I have been doing is trying to prolong conversation, not
Where's
rush
my gavel?
conversation.
I don't have my gavel here, for God's sake. Come on, guys. Let's be professional. Please. I know tensions are high, and we are in a very unusual time. So I ask that everyone just please be kind and professional.
I would like to observe that I had a number of comments I wanted to make during your presentation. I refrained from doing, so please give Bob the same respect.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So, Bob, are you finished? Did we lose Katie?
Yeah, I'll keep the rest of my comments for the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I will be brief as well, but I did want to do several things before I get to talk about our last week situation. First, as our clerk said, happy Pride Month. I am like to read to you a proclamation that I'm going to sign tonight, and I'd like to read it. The proclamation is designating June as LGBTQ Pride Month. Whereas the Village of River Forest supports the rights of every citizen to experience equality and freedom from discrimination, and whereas all people, regardless of age, gender, identity, race, color, religion, marital status, national origin, sexual orientation, or physical challenges, have the right to be treated on the basis of their intrinsic value as human beings. And whereas the Village of River Forest accepts and welcomes people of diverse backgrounds and believes a diverse population leads to a more vibrant community. And whereas the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities contribute to the cultural, civic, and economic successes of the Village of River Forest. And whereas, while we are a society at large are slowly embracing new definitions of sexuality and gender, we must also acknowledge that the need for education and awareness remains vital to end discrimination and prejudice. Now, therefore, I, Catherine Aducey, Village President of the Village of River Forest, do hereby proclaim June as Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Plus Pride Month in the Village of River Forest, Illinois, of course, and encourage our residents to reflect on the ongoing struggle for equality. Members of the LGBTQ plus face and celebrate the contributions that enhance our village. Therefore, I will sign that tonight, right in front of everyone. And we will post this on our website. And we'll be proud of, I hope, of this proclamation. As we reflect on many of the unsettling things that happened in our community last week, of course, between COVID and the flooding and the horrific incident last week, I just want to first say how proud and grateful I am to work with the most amazing men and women in River Forest, in the police department under the leadership of Jim O'Shea, with the village staff under the leadership of Eric Palm. How proud I am. Without their support and without their constant discussion, I don't know if we would have gotten through last week. So the swift investigation that you did, engaging in the state's attorney's felony review board, and the swift charges were phenomenal. And on behalf of the Village of River Forest, Jim, Chief O'Shea, Eric Palm, Lisa Shiner, and all of you in the police department and fire department, I want to say thank you. Thank you. I think Erica and Katie probably and others said it best. We need to do more. We need to bend the curve of equality. And I am in complete support of the forum that Katie and Erica would like to form. I believe it's the right thing to do. I believe we need to work hard at removing hatred and biases in our town, in our community, in our world. And yes, we will not tolerate hate in this community. So with that, I will end my comments because I don't want to get too late. And I want to, again, thank you. I want to thank the board.
Kathy?
Yes.
Can I just say something? I actually, I know you had mentioned that you were going to make a proclamation. I didn't realize it wasn't on the agenda, so I didn't realize that you were going to do it. And I almost hope that maybe we can say it again in our next meeting so I can invite some of our LGBTQ plus community to celebrate that, because that is a wonderful thing. And as a bisexual woman, I am very proud of River Forest for doing so, and would love that. And I know that there's maybe been some discussion around being able to fly the flag, the pride flag, and if we need to do more around that, then let's do it. If that's something that can happen right away, then let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I apologize for that. It was an oversight on the agenda, and of course I was scrambling, but the agenda had already gone out. So, and then I should have probably alerted you this past weekend, and everything going on, it slipped my mind. So I apologize for that. But yes, let's celebrate it. I want to celebrate and bring in friends and. Okay, thank you, Erica. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. If I can ask for a motion and a second for 6A through H, please.
I move to approve the consent agenda items A through H.
Second? Anybody second? Katie?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any comments or discussions on this, please? None. If I can ask the clerk to read it, and then please take the vote.
Consent agenda item A, Village Board of Trustees meeting minutes, May 26th, 2020. B, amend Title V of the Village Code regarding water rate increase ordinance. C, right-of-way encroachment waiver and agreement for an irrigation system located at 1140 Jackson. D, right-of-way encroachment waiver and agreement for an irrigation system located at 1339 Lathrop. E, monthly department reports. F, performance measurement report. G, accounts payable May 2020, $1,664,001.23. H, village administrator's report. Trustee Bachner?
Yes.
Trustee Kargi?
Yes.
Trustee Vasquez?
Yes.
Trustee Brennan?
Yes.
Trustee Hennick?
Yes.
Trustee O'Connell?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay. We have no consent items for separate consideration. So on 8, we have a recommendation, boards, commissions, and committees. We have the Plan Commission's approval of the Affordable Housing Plan. The motion is on the page. Can I have a motion and a second and read the motion if you please wouldn't mind?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the Affordable Housing Plan as unanimously recommended by the River Forest Plan Commission and direct the village staff to prepare an action plan to immediately begin exploring implementation of the plan's recommendations, included the designated involvement of appropriate staff, boards, commissions, and committees as deemed necessary. The action plan developed by the staff should designate the roles and responsibilities for actions including but not limited to the following. Number 1, amending the River Forest zoning ordinance to allow for taller and more dense development in designated commercial mixed-use areas consistent with the recommendations of the comprehensive plan in order to better accommodate possible inclusion of affordable housing as part of the new development. Number 2, identify strategies and the means with which to preserve and enhance existing affordable housing in the village, such as possible funding or programs aimed at assisting with the upkeep, maintenance, and improvements to identify existing affordable housing properties. Number 3, amending the River Forest zoning ordinance to accommodate accessory dwelling unit as a conditional use in the R1 and R2 zoning districts. Number 4, amending the River Forest zoning ordinance and possibly other village regulations to specifically accommodate, quote, integrative supportive housing, end quote. Number 5, amending the River Forest zoning ordinance, specifically the plan development standards sections 10-19-3, to identify consistencies with the goals and policies of the Affordable Housing Plan as a standard review. Number 6, establishing possible TIF fund allocation guidelines for the village to assist in the provisions of affordable housing development and initiatives in River Forest, including development of a new affordable housing and the improvement and enhancement of existing housing. The Affordable Housing Plan and our follow-through on the plan's actionable recommendations will allow our community to better accommodate and support provisions of affordable housing in River Forest to get to at least 10% affordable housing overall.
Can I ask for a point of order?
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
But before we do that, can I ask for a point of order, actually?
Oh, it's been moved and seconded. So.
Well, I want clarification from Greg, our attorney.
Yes.
And if I'm wrong about how we ended our last meeting, then that's why I want to have a point of clarification here.
What's the? Can you please state the question?
So my question is, I thought the way we left the last meeting was that there was a motion on the table that was pulled to allow us to table that in order for us to have the cow. So my understanding is that we had an open motion on the table already for approval of this plan. Am I wrong on that?
You're wrong. We didn't have an open motion. We took, both Bob and Tom took it off.
I think I withdrew the motion.
You withdrew the motion. So we have a second, right?
Yes, and regardless if there was a motion on the table for previously, a new main motion to approve the plan as Trustee O'Connell made and Trustee Kargi seconded is appropriate at this time. There's no procedural hurdles to the board considering the motion that's on the table right now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. So John and let's see, John and David, yes. If you're here. So Tom, you said you had other questions. Do you want to ask them now? I don't know
Well, I have an observation and a question.
Okay.
My first observation is I think it's unfortunate that, as with every contentious issue in our village, everyone resorts to scurrilous challenges of people's integrity. The whole John plagiarized Wilmette's affordable housing plan has been very well explained, but I think it's unfortunate that we needed to go there. Those people opposed to the plan, if you have merit to your argument, you don't need to insult the people that advance the plan. Advocate your argument. It also speaks to, it insults the members of the Planning Commission that went to 4 different meetings that spanned hours. I listened to 2 of them and read the minutes from the other 2. And at the end of the day, I think everyone on the Planning Commission listened to the complaints that people raised. I hate the fact that this is where we devolved to, that we all challenge the integrity of anyone we oppose because we oppose them, not because there's merit to the argument that they don't have integrity. John has been our village planner for 10 years, I think.
20 years.
20. At least he's been village planner longer than I've been on the board. And he's also a member of our community. And the emails that I've gotten over the weekend scare me, because what it is, it's more about challenging the integrity of the messenger rather than the merits of his argument. And I hate that, because that's the loser's argument. That is, don't believe what he says, but don't believe him because. And it's unfortunate because, for God's sake, people, we're in a bad place right now in this country. And those people that are opposing this thing added on to that parade of challenging people. I want to start with that because it frustrated me over the weekend when I got so many emails saying that this is a plagiarized document that means nothing. For no original thought in the law, it's basically just another form you took from somebody else and adapted to your use. So there's nothing wrong with using a previous form and adapting it to your use, and yet a lot of people tonight have made it a sin. And that's an incredible thing that disserves a good guy. I mean, John, I admire how much you've stood up for yourself, but how much you've withstood the insult that you've been subject to, not just tonight, but
to us.
Kathy, this is Rez. Can I?
Oh,
I have
yeah.
a couple questions.
I thought Tom had some, but absolutely,
Oh,
Rez.
I did.
No, I thought Tom said he did, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rez. I misheard it.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. Go ahead, Rez.
Okay. All right. I guess I'm almost following up with Trustee Brennan's question. I know she asked about penalties. I have a similar question, but my question is, I know that this plan was catered to actually just meet the state requirements, which are basically, in other words, the minimum requirements that the state requires. I get that. My question now is, if we were to submit this, does this in any way restrict us from proceeding on any of the recommendations that either we receive from the residents or otherwise regarding amending or improving or whatever you want to call it, modifying this this housing plan?
Are you asking me, Rez?
Oh, thank you. I don't know who that would go to.
Well, I mean, either Dave or I would say no. Okay. It's a jury.
It in no way, shape, or form hamstrings or prohibits the village in pursuing amendments later or other forums or creating other initiatives around affordable housing. Because this gets adopted to meet the state requirement and then some, it doesn't prevent the village from doing something else in addition to this going forward. No.
Okay. And another question that I have, for example, let's assume we were to increase the requirement up to, instead of 10 to 15%. And I know there's a recommendation regarding TIFs in there. I guess my question then is, if we do set a standard of a minimum of 15%, and I think Dave may have alluded to this a little bit, but I just want to be clear what that means. So if a multi-unit housing goes up, then the 15% is there. Did I hear correctly, or I'll just ask the question? Will we be missing opportunities from developers coming in, or will they, be entertaining us with a proposal or not? What's the recommendation, if you guys thought about it or talked about it?
Rez.
What?
Rez, let me just ask a quick question. I'm so sorry, David. Rez, when you talk about 10%, the recommendation and the goal of the plan is for the village to increase its overall affordable housing stock from the existing 9% to 10%, or certainly greater than 10%.
Yeah, at least 10.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure we're drawing the line between the recommendation to do that and the different goal of a policy, which the Plan Commission did not adopt, which was to require that each new development have a proportion of the units set aside as affordable units. So I just want to make sure we're clear.
Oh, I see.
Because I think I was a little bit confused by your question.
Oh, okay. And I apologize. I'm talking about a hypothetical, just in general. I saw some of the recommendations of increasing it to 15%. That's all right. And I wanted to see what the ramifications, or whether there was a discussion about that. I guess where I'm going with is, for example, I know on the senior assistant housing project, will we be setting standards of which then we would have to or be forced to implement? And let me finish. Well, then, for example, if residents come back, here's my concern. When we talk about these type of projects or requirements, obviously it's going to be implemented close to some of our residents. And it appears to me, and I'm not going with the Lake and Lathrop property, I'm just talking about the current one. The last one we did, which is the senior assisted living there on Chicago and Harlem. When these, generally people will speak highly about doing a project, but when it comes to their particular neighborhood or backyard, then they want to be heard. They want to have some other discussions about it. And I guess what my question now and where I'm leading is, if we set these types of minimal requirements or mandated requirements, will that somehow impede us from moving ahead on some of these projects?
Yeah.
Particularly if residents in that particular area are going to say, what are you doing? Not in my area. Oh, no, we don't want it, or et cetera.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay.
So will our hands be tied?
Yeah.
If
it's
take a shot at it.
mandatory.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hang on, John. Hang on. Lisa's going to answer. Okay.
Okay.
So if we say that any new project coming in is mandated to have a certain portion of the unit set aside for affordable housing, then the concern, I believe, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, the concern at the Plan Commission level and the reason it was left flexible is because if you're mandated in doing that, then you're tying the board's hands in saying that you have to approve something. Otherwise, the developer could potentially have recourse to seek after the village, either through the court system or through the appeals provisions of the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeals Act. So the Plan Commission, I think in their thinking, was looking at providing the village flexibility to encourage these developments in a genuine way, instead of mandating that everything be at a specific percent. So I think one of the concerns that we had talked about, or that I had talked about with Chairman Crosby, was what if a planned development comes before the DRB that has 9% of affordable housing units, but not 10% of affordable housing units? If we say that it has to be 10% or else, would the board be putting themselves in a position of having to deny that application on that basis? And so I think what the plan does as it's proposed is to leave flexibility for the board to look at these things on a case-by-case basis and provide relief to the developers in a way that takes into consideration the context of the neighborhood where the development is being proposed, but also takes into consideration the goal of increasing the number of affordable housing units in the village.
So, maybe I can just tag on that. So Lisa, but it also allows the residents to weigh in.
Absolutely.
Versus this is what the mandate is.
Yeah, exactly. This is what you have to do and this is what you have to have. So when we talk about zoning bonuses, I think there was some hesitancy to make it automatic because we take, for instance, Chicago and Harlem. If we mandated that a certain percentage of those units was affordable, and that for each affordable unit that they provide gives them the ability to add another unit at market rate, which is what Highland Park does. For every one affordable unit you have, you get one at market rate. So if we said that 15% of all of the units at Chicago and Harlem had to be affordable, that would give the developer, I think, another 25 market rate units. And we would be looking at potentially putting another floor on that building in order for it to make it work financially for that developer. Now, there's a lot of assumptions in there, and it's just sort of a back-of-the-napkin analysis, but I think that's the concern, is we heard from the community at multiple public hearings regarding planned developments within the last few years that the community has serious concerns about relaxing bulk regulations in River Forest. We also heard at the Plan Commission meeting and throughout the hearing process and the public meetings regarding the comprehensive plan that the community has reservations about allowing bigger buildings and greater bulk. When the board deliberated over the provisions in the comprehensive plan regarding relaxation of the bulk regulations or even modifying them, there was some concern at the board level about that. And so the language was modified and softened so that it's a consideration and not a mandate of the comprehensive plan that developers automatically have the right to build bigger buildings. So there has been a lot of discussion before the DRB, before the Plan Commission, and before the Village Board regarding bulk regulations. And the concern of the Plan Commission, and the concern, I believe, among staff, is that if we have mandates in the affordable housing plan That then mandates the village to allow bigger buildings where they may not be desired or where they may have a negative impact on the surrounding property owners, and that the village board would be required to approve that development.
And it doesn't give the residents any say-so on an individual basis, correct, Lisa?
So the residents would have say-so. They could certainly come before the DRB, they could come before the village board, and they could make their statements of objection. But if there is a mandate and the developer complies with the mandate and complies with the mandate that they be given relief,
Right.
the complaints, the concerns, the legitimate issues raised by the residents must be set aside to comply with the mandate.
So technically, we'd be taking some voice away from the people.
That is the concern.
For that specific site, yes, for each individual project.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that response, to all of you for that matter. I do have another question. And I see the 6, I guess, principles or goals that the plan is recommending to follow or pursue. And I do see that as part of the motion, there's going to be an action plan. How is that action plan going to be, or who's going to put that together primarily? Is it going to be just the village? Is it going to be some in conjunction with public comment, participation?
Yes.
Have you thought of that?
Yep. Eric, do you want to answer that? You can take your mess.
Well, I'm trying to lead by example
okay.
over here, you know.
All right.
It's become a habit more than anything.
All
so,
right, good for you.
And my shirt's
Just
blue
want to make sure
today,
you're
so
okay.
it matches with my
Okay.
shirt. But anyhow, no, that's something staff would put together and try to, be thoughtful in looking at the 6 different action steps and where we would see need and involvement from outside groups such as like the Plan Commission or Aging in Place, those boards and commissions and things of that nature, and try to weave all that. EDC is a good example.
I can even see where Megan had mentioned UIC, the organization. We could invite one of them into one of the discussions of one of those recommendations.
Right. And I think too, the larger discussion for the village board too as well is the as a couple people have pointed out tonight, we're kind of in a zoning we're in a lot of crossroads right now, I guess, but we're certainly in a zoning crossroads as well, right? Because you have the looking at this from the zoning ordinance and saying, hey, you know what, maybe it's time to look at this thing from 20,000 feet, step back and rewrite and maybe even blow it up, major portions of that. And so you're looking at that in just the general context of zoning as we are today. And then you're also now looking at it from this other prism, right, of affordable housing. And so I think them coming together at the same time, the plan that you're looking at tonight is starting to move that forward as it looks through it in that lens. But make no mistake about it, and not to get into a discussion about meetings and timing and stuff like that, but that will be certainly an in-depth process. I know looking at the files from when the zoning ordinance was amended in '98, and I think, John, you may have been around for that.
But
it's a long.
I think this is significant to understand, and because you have to hear it a couple of times. The process of amending a zoning code or a text amendment in a zoning code is long and arduous. It's not just a thing that we talk about and then we, go home and vote on it. It's many public hearings. It's many public input. It's a lot of work, and so I think you even told me at one point in time, Eric, and just to do some of these recommendations, it will be years, right? Could be 1.5 to 2 years. David, you're nodding, so I don't think I'm way off, and so that's why this is an interesting point that we're at, and I'll get into that later on. Is that these actions take time and energy from staff, boards, commissions, nonprofits, organizations outside of our community. It's going to take time. So, but if we don't do it, then we take another year to to study it. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that was clear because I'm not quite sure I caught it as as it.
I would agree, and I think the timing is that we're having this discussion in context of one of the recommendations of the comp plan was to look at the zoning title. So you're going to go back at a potential rewrite and really look at it, focus on it really in two prisms. And I would argue that these things are all kind of, dovetailed together in certain regards. So I think instead of just having it in one silo and then coming back and looking at it, the conversation in another silo, I think it makes sense to marry them together and have that conversation. That would just be
Which
my...
actually would take care is what number 1 is, right? On the action.
Yeah,
right.
Let me bring it up.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So can I ask another question? So let's assume if either that we were above the state requirements, so the plan wouldn't have been required for us to file with the state. Or if this plan gets denied today, where would it go? Would it go back to the Planning Commission?
Yeah.
That's for you all. I don't know if it would come to us or, if it did come to us, I would need some serious direction as to what we should do with it.
Okay, I would appreciate that, Dave. I just wanted to know where it would go from, if it was denied, where it would go, and what the process would be that way. I guess either way, this would end up in some partial way going maybe back to the Planning Commission, part of it back to the zoning, part of it back to somewhere else, maybe, I guess, depending on how this action plan gets put together. So, I already heard that this plan, or at least even if it gets filed, it's not going to stop us from moving ahead and making some additional recommendations that need to be made, and whoever ends up participating with that.
That was part of the motion, yes.
Okay.
And I just want to say, it's important to note that these additional considerations 1 through 6, we're using words like explore and consider, which means you've got work to do, and right. Whether that all these different committees and maybe get involved to hash this out.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have nothing.
So no, Russ. That one, the action or recommendation regarding auxiliary dwelling units, for instance. That could be certainly an item that you, as your committee, could take over. It would be appropriate place for it to begin the conversation, and it would be, I would love to see something come of that, because I definitely think that would move the needle toward a very significant affordable housing percentage.
And Kathy, we already started talking about what potential restrictions would be outside of that, with what other potential zoning ordinances would be useful in terms of amending that would be helpful for seniors in place. So we're looking at stuff like that, or going to be looking at stuff like that.
I just wanted to say real quickly, if we just did, if we were successful with the accessory dwelling units provision, and we're deficient 39 affordable units according to the state, we want to exceed that, and I think that's a great goal. If we get accessory dwelling units correct, we could exceed that so quickly, and not even talk about multifamily stuff, depending on how that ordinance looks. So I don't underestimate how impactful the ADU provision could be.
Well, here's my concern about that. When I picked up the plan and read it, I read on page 2 of the plan, paragraph 3, the only conceivable way of achieving the plan's goal is to create mixed use and multifamily. So I read that and okay, that's what they chose. That's the direction they're going in. And then you get to the, page 5 or 6, and they get the most specific thing that's said there is that, the way that we get from 9 to 10% is focusing on multi-use or multifamily, multi-use And we're going to do that by offering these incentives to developers to put in affordable housing. And then we've already had the discussion that that's not realistic in the current marketplace. That's offering those incentives is really not going to, today, it's not going to incentivize developers because they won't even come to the table without getting those incentives right now. So there's another step that has to be taken first, which is amending our zoning laws, which is a big deal, as you said, Kathy. So,
but I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead, Katie. Go ahead. Go ahead. Because I think that. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, so I read the plan. I see that you're focusing on you're going mixed use, multifamily. Okay, although I personally, in my heart of hearts, think that accessory dwelling units is the way to go in this village because we have an excess of large homes and our smaller and more modest homes sell right away. And in general, our larger homes are sitting on the market and, looking for, that the, future River Forest residents who are looking to buy homes are not, these young adults are not looking for these huge homes. They do not want the big house. They want a better work-life ratio. They don't want a huge debt. So we need to preserve and care for our smaller and more modest housing stock, but we have this large stock, so what are we going to do with it? Accessory dwelling units is great. But I read through the plan and I see that according to this plan, this isn't your plan, these are my notes. According to this plan, you're not focusing on that. You're focusing on this, mixed use, offering incentives to developers to put in affordable housing. Okay, fine. And then you get to the page 7, the very end, with a goal, which says, other options could possibly be added in the ordinary course to meet a growing need. And accessory dwelling units falls under that. Other options could possibly be added in the ordinary course to meet a growing need. And that to me does not sound like a plan. It sounds like a potential eventuality if it rains on Tuesday. So I hear tonight that the proposal on the table is this plan with all of these other things, 6 or 7 other addendums to it, which, okay, that's a lot of things that have to work. But this particular plan that's in front of me, I can't get behind because it doesn't really say something to me that's workable. Potentially if we can go back to the Planning Commission and massage all these other things that are in the proposal and work with the other commissions to make it more of a game plan than I can't remember the term that was used yesterday with one of the, a potential. Then I could get behind it. But as it is, in conjunction with the motion that's on the table, I can't get behind it.
Yeah.
So Katie, when you go through this thing, I think we've talked through a number of the points here tonight. And so if you look at some of the comments that came from the 47 letters that we all got this weekend, so what you're telling me is you're willing to talk to the widow who lives in South River Forest, who someone comes to their house, she's going to put her house on the market, and she wants to sell it for a number that's over the affordable range, and somebody's willing to pay that. She's not going to be able to do that because we can't replace that 1-to-1.
No, Bob, what you're saying, you're putting words in my mouth. You're saying only 1-to-1. I'm not saying that.
No, what you said was you could get behind this plan, and I'm trying to understand which part of the plan you can get behind. So if you're telling me you can't get behind that plan, that eliminates one of the items, okay? And so then we move on to the other one is adopt a goal of at least 10%. Can you get on board with that?
Bob, what I'm telling you is that this is not a plan. This document fulfills the letter of the requirement by the state of Illinois, but it does not fulfill the spirit of it. And I cannot get behind that.
Hey, I disagree with you because a plan is just that. And to require a plan to anticipate every possible eventuality is unrealistic and unfair. And so I think that what this does is it sets us up in the future to deal with the specific situations without hamstringing us to as Bob said, I mean, one of my biggest concerns about what's been advocated by the same people that send everyone that sends the same email over and over again was, what about the family that wants to sell their home to someone that wants to pay more than what constitutes affordable housing? And so I think it's much more appropriate that we deal with these situations on an individualized basis rather than a broad blanket that hamstrings everything. So I disagree with that. I am fine with the plan because it's a basis to move forward. It's not a stricture that limits what we can do in the future.
Exactly.
I hear you. I think there's a big difference between an aspiration, and that's the term that was used that I couldn't think of earlier. I feel like this is aspirational, but there is no roadmap whatsoever as to how to get there. And I think there's a big difference between aspiration and covering every eventuality, which is what you just said, Tom.
And I guess what I think too, I'm sorry, is that nothing would prevent that person, Tom, from selling an existing home for whatever they can get on the market. I mean, isn't that right, John?
It depends.
Sorry for interrupting, but I just want to make my point clear. If we look at the houses on Chicago and Harlem and assume that they were affordable, and I'm not sure they were, but if the plan were in effect, the people couldn't have sold their houses to the senior development, as I understand it, because there wouldn't have been the opportunity to replace their houses with affordable housing someplace else. So the developer obviously is not going to buy two houses. And so we were saying to residents, you can't maximize the value of your property by selling it to someone that wants to buy it and use it for a non-residential purpose, because we've got to demand that you have a one-to-one replacement of affordable housing with affordable housing. That's the issue I'm concerned about. We're constraining ourselves to broad metrics that sound good, that may impact people unfairly.
Can I just have a clarification here? This is Patty. We seem to be saying different things in terms of a homeowner not being able to sell their home if it's considered affordable. Correct me if I'm wrong, but where in the plan have we identified all the properties, specific properties in the village, and identified which specific homes are considered affordable and which aren't? So Tom, to your point about the two homes on Harlem, we had some speculation that those homes might be considered affordable, but I don't think anybody did an analysis of that to say that they were in fact affordable. And as far as I can tell, we don't have this kind of identification calling out specific properties.
I think more the email that was sent by everyone that said the same thing, that talked about a one-to-one requirement.
Yeah.
So if you were to sell a home that was considered affordable, and again, I'm not saying those houses on Harlem would be deemed affordable. I don't know that.
Right.
But I'm just saying for the purpose of illustration, those people would be constrained from selling their house at presumably maximum value because you had a developer looking to buy. So obviously pay top dollar. We would be saying to them, you can't sell that house because we're not going to replace your affordable house someplace else.
No, I get what you're saying, but I guess I would like to speak to the points that one-to-one, because it's how I understood it, and my guess would be it's how these residents understood it. They're talking about, I mean, David Flint spoke to this. When we identify the condos at Chicago and Harlem behind me, I think it's pretty clear that those homes would be considered more affordable because based on their sale prices and what people would perhaps be able to buy those for. So you're talking close to 100 units over there. And so the concern was when that was called out as a possible development site, the concern would be to, if you knocked all those buildings down and developed them again, you are never going to be able to replace 100 units that are going to be more considered affordable. I think it's in these bigger buildings that are perhaps like places on North Avenue, some of those multifamily buildings that are going to be more ripe for the taking, perhaps, as potential development sites, right? I don't think we are talking in terms of one-to-one individual single-family homes when people are talking about this concern of one-to-one. I guess.
Patty, as I listen to Dan Lauber, I think that's what he was talking about because he was talking about the 16 unit people
let me intercede, you guys, because I mean, we could talk about the 1-for-1. I mean, that's not in the plan. We could add it. I want Lisa to please, I mean, because Katie asked a question and she says, I can't get behind the plan for these reasons. And that's fine. But I think you deserve an explanation and I think hopefully a significant one that at least explains what the plan is supposed to do, what needs to be done to even begin implementing this plan, which is significant. We could talk, and I'll let Lisa do it right now. Go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. Number one, the village is required to have a plan. What is before you meets the state's requirements. The Plan Commission drafted a plan that they believe will pass muster with the state, that the attorney has reviewed, that the Plan Commission has voted on, that the consultant has prepared after looking at other plans that have passed muster. And so that's what you have before you is a plan that complies with the state requirements. What the Plan Commission said was that in addition to the goals and strategies that they are required to insert into the plan, in order for it to comply with the state's requirements, they were looking for additional tools in the toolbox that they could identify, add, and get the village started on to make these things a reality. So the state's requirement is that the plan identify the need, identify the opportunities, identify the goal, and state the goal, and state the incentives that would be used to achieve the goal. So zoning bonuses is one of those incentives. The Plan Commission took it a step further and said, in addition to that, we want to look at these other things, such as bulk regulations, ADUs, taking a look at leveraging
integrated
TIF
support,
funds, integrated supportive housing. So they went over and above to not just, they had to, at a minimum, meet the state's requirements, but then they came up with these other ideas and these other solutions that could help move things along perhaps a little bit faster. So while we're looking at zoning bonuses and the potential relaxation of zoning regulations, which does take time and considerable study and thought, because it will have implications across the entire community, there are other tools such as ADUs that we can start working on now. And I appreciate your comments about it being aspirational. I think the motion incorporates the additional recommendations that the Plan Commission included. And I would look back when we as a staff look at what the implementation plan is. The comprehensive plan is a very lengthy document. It's very aspirational. And so we have the entire implementation matrix that we adopted as an appendix so that we can understand the different things and the different tasks that we need to be working on to get that comp plan implemented. And so I think the motion from the board gives us the same roadmap, is to say, here's the aspiration, here's the plan, it meets and exceeds the state's requirements, and here are the different action items that we want staff to start working on, and we want you to come back and tell us how you what groups you plan to implement, what meetings, how you plan to attack this.
Right, and we've heard tonight, and I don't want to let it, I don't want to lose it. All the personal, equity, inclusion arguments or discussions, those don't go away. Those are actually going to be talked about. If we can get to an action, this is a journey. This is the start of this journey. If we just keep talking about the plan, Katie, which I'm fine with, we can, and I really don't want not to include all of these conversations into our discussion. But my fear is that I think we're giving an impression that we don't want to do that, and I'm thinking we do by actually addressing each one of these actionable items in more detail, inviting the right people into the conversation, or inviting the right folks into the conversation, whether it be, Phil Comedy talking about integrated support. We want Phil into that conversation. We want him to give us information about how we can ensure that we have homes for the those with disabilities. We want that. And go ahead.
I thought you were finished, but you.
I don't know, we're getting some emails. No, I'm finished. I think I get the impression that this, we vote on this plan, we walk away, and we lose all these other great things, wonderful things that everybody said this plan needs. And I say this is a journey. This is the beginning. I talked to Megan today. I said, I don't see why this is where it stops. I see where it begins. People said, you have to take proactive steps to discuss the values of River Forest. This is what I think this is. It's taking proactive steps to begin to discuss the value of the community, values that we have in the community, and the livability of our community. There's no reason we can't augment all of that into these 6 or 7 things that we talked about tonight. There's no reason. And I get the feeling that, we have to solve this one issue and it is void of all these other things that we talked about tonight. It is not. And in my mind, I think it's all included into these discussions.
Kathy, I hear what you're saying, but I think what you're saying is stuff that is not in this plan and that should be. I think that what you're saying makes this stronger, and those items aren't in here to do those things.
But we want to get there. That's what I'm saying, Erica. I don't know how to, we could sit as a commission, and David, I guess we could, for another 10 months, another 12 months, another whatever, pick a number, 2 years, to try to get all of the pieces and parts that you feel are important, and they're all very important. Or we can take each one of the elements and the considerations I believe the Plan Commission gave us and make that actionable and actually engage residents, engage the right organizations to help us think this through, or not. And I guess I'm looking at it as we could do better, and this is the way to do better, by really engaging the right people in the right spots for the right discussion. So
I think that needs to be in the plan, Kathy. I think that what we have right now isn't very actionable.
Because we have to get it to the right people to do it actionable.
Can I make an
you know what I'm saying, Erica? Maybe I'm missing your point. How do you get maybe you don't like voting? How do you get ADUs into a plan in more detail if we can't have a committee or a commission if we don't allow staff to start talking about that particular issue? I mean, I don't know.
I think that you put it in the plan. You state the goal, and you say, this is how we're going to accomplish ADUs in River Forest. And by doing these things, we think that, it's going to take maybe this amount of time to go through the staff, and then this amount of time, and like maybe by 2025, ADUs will supply us with the affordable housing that we need. This plan doesn't focus on ADUs. It focuses on multi-housing, other components.
No. I'm sorry, Erica, but what we just motioned in second does. We're the leaders of this community, and everyone on this phone wants us to lead. And it's like we're kicking the can down the road. It's like, okay, no, let somebody else go do this. And I'm saying, why can't we take the leadership role and begin to have real actionable items around the things that you want? We want ADUs. So why can't we allow, committees like RES and others to start really diving into the ADUs and come back to us for approval and recommendations that has all the things that we talked about tonight with these wonderful residents. It's like we want to solve all of it with one group. And I'm saying I want to solve it with many groups so that we get it right.
Can I make some observations? This is Patty. Can I make some points here?
Sure.
Are you finished?
Yeah.
Part of where I can't get behind this plan is that, I hear what you're saying, Kathy, that there's other steps and other pieces to this that we need to do, right? But I also heard you say that this could actually take quite some time to actually finish out these various additional steps, right? Maybe 2 years, 3 years. What I'm concerned about in the current form of this plan is that it is not providing more narrative around why these items. So we're all sitting here today and you're saying we on this call right now can act as leaders. People are looking to us as leaders. But here's the thing. We have an election a year from now. Our board could look very different than what it does right now today. Our commissions could look very different. This plan is meant to help inform and guide decision making for, I'm guessing, at least 5 years, maybe 10 years, right? And so without having more of a specific narrative so that folks who weren't part of this process can understand why at this point in time. And so when I look back to the idea of comparing the two plans in regards to having the Wilmette plan being our starting template, that was a 14-page document that included a lot of this narrative I'm talking about. And it was, through the course of whatever steps, reduced to a 6-page document. And I know at least part of the conversations at the Plan Commission meeting in January was Commissioner Cragen in particular asking for some sort of snapshot of River Forest today and what does that look like. And there was a lot of conversation around that. And then when the draft came back in March, it still didn't include this snapshot she was talking about and what she was asking for. And so then things went back again and came back in May. And I have to tell you, I was quite dismayed to go and read the Wilmette plan and to see that the type of information that she was looking for was in fact in this template. And so it seems to me, I guess I would wonder why the Plan Commission wasn't provided the full template to be working from, as opposed to a whittled down draft that actually made this plan less effective, in my opinion, because it doesn't really inform future commission members, future board members. My other observation without all this process is that during the comprehensive plan, we had time to talk about points about affordable housing. And there were times that the conversation started to get down this path of being more detailed, right? And at that point, because I know I was one of them who tried to put a little bit of teeth in the points in the comprehensive plan, I was told at that point, now's not the time to have this conversation. We're going to have the ability to have this conversation when we work through the affordable housing plan. We're going to work on that. That's the time for us to have this conversation. And then we get to this conversation and we're not having this conversation. And I know back in September when we were asking, when the question was raised about having another expert, I specifically asked, will this plan help us with more specific examples of how we might be able to preserve existing affordable housing? And I was essentially told that would be something that would be included in this plan. And now what I'm seeing is that it's very vague as far as what that might look like. I expected this to be more of a more specific, I don't mean coming up with all the answers, right? But I definitely expected way more guidance and a much better narrative that can be passed down and evolve as we go. And I don't see that this particular plan provides that. That's why I can't get behind this, because I also feel like in the course of listening to the conversation, and I know like Commissioner Amalis tried to bring the conversation around having this look like a document that would speak to diversity in our community and having it speak to the idea of it sort of being a value statement. And so when I go back to the Wilmette plan, in the introduction of their plan, it's 1.0 is introduction. 1.1 is purpose and scope, talks about information about Wilmette. The very last line of their introductory paragraph that was deleted for our plan. There were multiple paragraphs that we kept in our plan and really literally just changed Wilmette to River Forest. But in this particular case, right at the start, so anybody, no matter who you are, developer, someone moving into town, want to get a sense of what does this community stand for in terms of affordable housing, it's right there at the start of this document. At least for Wilmette it is. It's not for us. And the last sentence in their document, bolded, the crux of this plan is the village's ongoing commitment to a proactive but reasoned approach to providing additional affordable housing. The plan then goes in to talk about some of the challenges, just like we're talking about in terms of really providing the 15%, and does that work or discourage developers? This other information as far as what would be the concern. So it's acknowledging we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to look at proactive but reasoned, sort of the concern of residents' potential fear of, I'm not going to be able to sell my home now because it's considered affordable, and so now I'm going to be limited on what I can get for that. That's wrong. I think that particular example is a false interpretation of that one-to-one, particularly when in regards to single-family homes. But I think this document should absolutely provide more narrative at the very least and expand on why we want these things.
So, Patty, are you doubling down on the whole plagiarism thing, but now arguing we didn't plagiarize enough from Wilmette?
Tom, that's a very unfair comment to make. And
all right.
It's not.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Okay, wait.
Okay. Come on, guys. Stop.
Tom.
Okay, I want to ask.
Tom.
I want to ask a question, Patty. Here, it's
Can
not
I
worth
please
it.
respond to that?
Patty, it's not. Here.
No,
I want to ask.
No, let me expand on my argument. A template is a template. The end product reflects the input of 6 members of our village that listened to John and decided what they wanted the final product to be. You seem to suggest that somehow, because a document was used to establish the template, that became the governing aspect of the final document. And it's incredibly unfair to John. It's incredibly insulting to the members of the committee that sat through 4 meetings to debate this issue and come up with a final document. I mean, it angers me. It angers me.
Okay.
No, Patty, I'm going to finish. It angers me that you and other people that have been spreading this rumor about this plagiarism throughout the weekend have insulted a member of our community that's worked for the village for a number of years and that deserves our respect. but you're also insulting the members of the planning commission because somehow they just adopted the plagiarized document from Wilmette and did nothing more. It's insulting and it's unfair. And how did we get here? That's the sad part for me. How are we saying that people that live in our community and work for our community are just simply sloughing this off because they don't agree with you? And that's what it comes down to, Patty. You're saying that because their document doesn't reflect what you want, you can, Patty, I'll let you finish, but I'm going to finish. Because their document doesn't reflect what you want, that it's wrong. And that's, to me, sad.
Okay, I'd like to just turn this conversation, Patty. I want to ask the other trustees.
He is misrepresenting. He is absolutely misrepresenting.
Because we want to get to more a conversation. I want to ask
Kathy.
Patty. Okay, then could you be kind of? It's getting late, and I want to make sure that
I will attempt to be as concise as I can.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
I am not at all saying anything about plagiarism. What I'm saying is that if we started with this as the template, then the Plan Commission should have been given the full template to review and discuss and talk about. And I am not saying I'm getting rid of this, I don't support this plan because of the plagiarism. I also don't believe any of the residents who have emailed is saying that they don't want to have the plan because it was plagiarized. That's not at all what I'm saying. And I think it's unfair for you to imply that this is all about me not getting what I want. I didn't see the 50 plus emails that we got as people saying, I'm just not going to support this because this is about plagiarism. I saw this as 50 residents who were sharing things that they wanted us to do, things that they wanted to see in a plan, imploring on us. And I get that there are folks that may think these ideas came from Dan Lauber and supposedly that these are, instead of 50 emails from 50 different residents, it's 50 emails from Dan Lauber. I think the idea that you're bringing it down to this,
Danny,
I'm not getting what I want.
From one person.
Okay, nobody thinks that. I didn't get 50. I got about 20, so I got short. But I want to bring this, elevate the conversation. I know it's late, and I know it's, and I apologize for that, but I think we can do better in this conversation and elevate it just a bit. And I'd like to go back to, even Erica. Erica, you had mentioned that, there are things that you want to see. And I'd like, if you can articulate, just so that there is some understanding, because we talk around it, and I'd like to just not talk around anymore. I'm about, listening and getting something done. So help me, Erica, Katie, when you say you want to see the plan in, I don't know, I've lost my train of thought, more robust. Am I getting that right? What is it? Tell me specifically what you are looking for.
I would suggest that we pause and send it back to the Planning Commission to spend some more time on it, considering all this new input that they have, both from residents and from the board. And one specific example of something that could be reworked that would make me happy would be if we are hanging our hat on accessory dwelling units, let's do it. Let's not hide it under a bushel. I think that is it sounds like you agree with me, Kathy.
I absolutely agree. That's what I want to vote on it tonight. I want to get started on that. A planning commission can't do the ADUs.
How can we hear you while your mic looks like it's off? You're like magic.
No, it's on.
Oh.
It's on. Oh, I'm sorry, because we're using the community room. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
So, you got, what I'm hearing tonight all of a sudden is that, oh yeah, accessory dwelling units, we're gung-ho on it. But when you look at this plan, not so much. So why don't we give the commission a chance to take all this input? And what I'm hearing also is that, oh, well, the plan, the proposal is to ask Aging in Place task force to do work on this, and they've already got some ideas. So let's flesh that out. Let's actually give a roadmap.
Who's
a real
us?
roadmap to this plan.
Who's us? So we, again, I want to make sure that we're not maybe it's semantics here a little bit, but right now the Plan Commission gave you recommendations. Some it said considerations, but I'm calling them recommendations. There's 6 of them, and maybe you don't like the language, and we'll change it. We're the leaders of this community, and I've heard a lot of great ideas. I wrote them all down, and I want to use them all. But I think what we're all trying to say is, well, that's the commission. Give them all this to them so they can spend 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, and hopefully they'll come back with an ADU. I'm not convinced that that's what will happen. They may get more detail on what an ADU is. They may have more data. I'm not going to disagree. I mean, there could be certainly more metrics and data in the plan. But I think it needs to be fleshed out with, maybe I'm wrong here. I don't know. John, you tell me. It needs to be fleshed out with other committees and commissions and boards for us to take it to the next level. And if I'm wrong there, then correct me. But anyway, I'm trying to find a way to ensure that we don't lose momentum to get affordable housing in River Forest, because we're all are saying we want it. Forget the state plan. I'm not even. I'm not. It's not a. I'm not checking a box. I really, truly want affordable housing. I truly want it.
I know you do, and I believe you. And one of the best sentences we've heard tonight is "forget the state plan."
Yeah.
Because I think probably the rubric of that state plan, put us in a check the box.
I know. I know that.
And thinking, what is it that we want? What do we look like? What can we do?
I agree.
So I would suggest that we sit back, take a breath, give ourselves 6 months to get it right, to get a plan that all the trustees can feel proud about signing, especially at this moment in time.
Hey, Katie, I just have to take offense to one thing. I don't believe the Plan Commission checked the box. So I think that is an unfair statement on your part to David and the team. Okay, my other question is, we all received 47 emails. David, could you tell me how many people in total attended any of your Plan Commission meetings? And the point is, this stuff always rears its ugly head on the Friday before something happens. People are invited to meetings. These are public hearings that are posted. Patty, don't shake your head. It's true. Okay, so if there weren't 47 people that were involved, somebody got everybody in line to send the 47 letters. Okay, and so if people want to take responsibility for it, take responsibility for being part of the process from the beginning, not at the end.
I think that's fair, Bob, because often people are looking at the village information, the village board information. That's the first time that they're seeing it. People lead busy lives, especially right now with everything that's going on. So I don't think that that's a fair sentiment. I would like to, Kathy, say too, is that we did talk about having an expert as part of this process. And back, I think in September when we talked about that, you and Eric mentioned that you did know people who could help out with this. I think that Megan pointed us to one group, the group at UIC. There probably are others. And I think it's important to get an outside expert to look at this as well. And maybe there are some things that we missed here that are possible for River Forest, and maybe we don't see it because we don't work in it day in and day out on affordable housing.
If you don't mind, I'd like to just make a quick kind of comment or a thought that I have, and that is, kind of going back to this example of the accessory dwelling units. If you take the approach and say, okay, let's send this back to the Plan Commission and let them drill down and give us more detail on this. I guess what I would pose and suggest is that, would you rather the Plan Commission do that, or would you rather have a zoning board that is specific to that issue?
Yes.
Hash it out and figure it out. Because, I don't want to discredit our group. We're capable of many things, but these are some very specific issues that need to be hashed out. And if you want, let's say, a generalist like the Planning Commission to do that, okay, but you might have a better product in the end if you have someone that's specific to that to look at it. That's all I would do.
Well, David, that's an interesting point. Would all of this could potentially, once each individual commissions or committees, wherever it went to on these 6 recommendations that we've identified, could they all kind of go back to the Plan Commission to create a bigger document, more robust document, after we've kind of looked at the different ordinances, different, just having the different discussions? Could all of that go back to the Plan Commission, which creates a bigger, more robust plan as a collection, I guess, of conversations? Because I like you, David, there's separate conversations, there's separate meetings, there's separate organizations that get involved. It's just not the Plan Commission. And so I think each item, 1 through 6, have a different group of people that need to be part of that conversation. Like the integrated support housing. I mean, we would want Opportunity Knocks absolutely engaged in that conversation. So who's going to do that when you say bring it back to the Plan Commission? Those 7 people aren't going to bring in Opportunity Knocks to listen to them. They're going to say, okay, yes, of course we want housing for our physically and mental disability families. Of course we do. Then now we have to flesh it out. And Opportunity Knocks can help us understand what it means to actually have an integrated support housing system. Maybe I'm wrong, but then you can collect all of this information, and that becomes our true planning, a planning document with real actionable items that we, the board, and it's up to us. We make the final decisions and even the interim decisions on all of this. There's nobody else behind us. So when you say give it back to them and let them have a conversation, like David said earlier, we've got to give them direction. And it's coming from us. So I want to remind the trustees that the direction needs to come from us. So however we end this night tonight, whether it exceeds or not, we need to give David explicit directions on what we want this planning document to ultimately be, because they have to get there. And I say, why not widen the world? Why not bring everybody into the conversation like all of our residents are asking us to do? And I know, I'm sure people are like, well, not until we get, these 4 or 5 very specific 1-for-1 inclusionary zoning. Again, those conversations have been discussed. And I'm saying we could continue to discuss those, but I don't know if the output's going to be any different than what we have, unless you direct the Planning Commission to do something different, I guess is what I'm saying. So I don't want all of us to leave here tonight like it's David's problem. David, go fix it. I hope that's not what you're all saying. I hope we're all going to roll up our sleeves, all of us, and give direction, specific direction on what you want the Plan Commission to accomplish. I mean, in each, whether it's these categories or 10 more categories. And then they have to want to spend the hours and hours and hours and hours to do it, and we would have to get the staff probably involved. So this isn't an easy thing And I'm not even suggesting we shouldn't do it because it's not easy. I'm just saying, let's not fool ourselves that we're going to leave tonight and it's going to be somebody else's problem. It's our issue. We're the leaders. We're elected. And we need to give very clear direction. So leave it as that.
If I can just jump in real quickly, if I can, just to provide my perspective from a planning perspective, I think the plan is very actionable. I think the plan identifies specific things that the village ought to be doing to begin to implement and move the needle on affordable housing. For instance, the plan clearly states, as read by Trustee O'Connell in his motion, the issue about investigating guidelines for the distribution and utilization of TIF funds in the village of River Forest, and through those guidelines seek ways to leverage TIF funding for the development of new affordable housing and for the improvement and enhancement of existing affordable housing properties in the village. That should probably be done by the village's TIF consultant, Eric, and the EDC. I mean, that group could very effectively come back, for instance, and say, we've debated it, we've had several meetings, we've had the experts in here. If we make these modifications or guidelines to expenditures of TIF funding, this is our best shot or the clearest guidance to leveraging, like the plan says, guidelines to better leverage TIF funds for the development and improvement of affordable housing. The same notion that Kathy mentioned about Res working with the group for accessory dwelling or bringing in opportunity knocks. These are really complicated issues. And to sort of say, let's figure out ADUs as part of this, I'm telling you, they're so complex, they're all zoning. There are several recommendations to amend the zoning ordinance, several. The plan says very clearly, examine amending the zoning ordinance to specifically do this. Well, those have to be, by law, public hearings with the ZBA or Plan Commission, separate to discuss just the zoning amendments. They can't be part of this. They have to be in reaction to and an implementation of the plan's recommendations to, as read off, amend the zoning ordinance to X. Someone has to be charged with having the public hearings and the expertise and the research to recommend X at a public hearing. So the plan is very specific on a minimum of 6 things that the Plan Commission said if we did these 6 things, we would move the needle on affordable housing. Let's get at these 6 things and have staff, as read off by Bob, create an action plan for the right plan, the right commission, the right board, the right trustees, the right other groups, the right staff, the right experts to start picking these things off. It can't just be all thrust back as part of the affordable housing plan. These are beyond the affordable housing plan. They're key pieces that have to be follow-up implementation. And I think the plan provides a lot of actionable, very specific recommendations that if the village did, we'd make a huge impact.
Can I call for a vote on the motion?
Yeah. Again, I mean, we can, and I want to make sure that everyone understands that however this goes, I mean, this is our responsibility to put in action. Okay, well, go ahead if anybody doesn't have any more questions or comments. Okay, take the vote.
Trustee Karji.
Yeah.
Trustee Vasquez.
Okay, this comes with a statement. You know, I've been listening, I've been reading, I've been not only the emails we've been receiving, but also what we've been talking about today. You know, at one point, I think, you know, if we didn't have this requirement to file this state report, I think that probably would alleviate a lot of our issues. I'm going to say that I am not representing that this plan is comprehensive. But that was also part that this plan was only supposed to address the state requirements, the minimum. I'm not saying that's right, but that's what our direction was on the comprehensive plan. That's what these guys developed. The other thing is that as I'm listening, we're all saying that we're going to work, and we should work at modifying what should be a better affirmative housing plan, affordable housing plan, I should say. And so where I'm seeing and I'm looking, the options are, we're going to work in perfecting what the plan should be. And I agree with that. But at the same time, we're saying we're going to work. The choices are, we don't approve this plan, but we're going to work to make it a good plan. And then the other option is, we could file this as a state requirement that we're supposed to be doing, and then still work on the plan and perfect it the way we want to or should. So the only distinguishing factor is that we're not going to be filing, possibly not going to be filing this state requirement, or state required plan. I just want to move ahead. I mean, and I will say that even though these ADUs are part of this recommended aspiration, whatever we want to call it, I am taking it as, because that was discussion I've already had before with the dementia-friendly individuals when I was in that group, before we even started this ad hoc committee on aging. So what I'm saying is those discussions occurred, at least from my vantage point, occurred before even the committee started. And if this vote doesn't go through, then I'm still going to work towards that. Hey, I'm a person of color. I've had to work hard. I mean, my parents were from Mexico. They put us through, through school. We had to work hard. As part of that, I don't stop at challenges, so to speak. I face them, and I'm sure you guys will too. I'm just saying that, I'm going to move ahead. I'm going to go and work on getting this as a good plan as it should be. I guess maybe being a lawyer, I just don't like the fact that we're not complying with state statutes. The fact that even if we file this plan as a plan, we are still not prohibited, and I would encourage we still continue to work towards perfecting what a plan is and not relying on this plan, the state plan. And so for all those reasons, I'm going to vote a yes on this, and I strongly encourage that I will make the commitment to move this plan and perfect it. Whether that's with my committee, whether that's with the zoning, whether that's with anybody else. So my vote for yes is not to say that this plan is the end all, and I know maybe we don't intend that, but it almost sounds like we would, but we shouldn't. So again, I'll repeat, yes for this.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. No, you're true. Yeah.
Trustee Brennan.
Yeah. My comment is, Rez, I respect your rule following inclination. I would rather get the plan right and have a delay in filing it. So I'm voting no.
Trustee Hennick.
I'd have to agree that I'd like to see us get this right, and this is not a reflection on trying to rush anything through. By reality is I've been trying to extend meetings, so the idea that I'm the one who's just trying to push things through is not true. We all know that it has been years since this state requirement has been a requirement. It's my understanding that with everything with COVID, that deadlines that may have been in place have been extended. Greg may be able to speak to that a little better, but I'm again not talking dragging this on forever. I'm talking even just, a couple more meetings to give people an opportunity to digest everything that's just been shared and to think more about what has been shared, and to Katie's point, to get this right. And I think by doing that, it shows all the residents that we're listening, that we really want to take our time on this, that we're, again, capturing a moment in time, as we all said at the beginning, in terms of this moment in time, to start showing what our values are and making that as a statement, I think is very important. And so I'm going to be a no.
Trustee O'Connell. I'm sorry, I could not hear you. Can you say that again?
Yes.
Trustee Bachner.
I don't think that the items listed in this plan will help us with being able to get to the bare minimum of 10% affordable housing in rural forests. I just don't. I think it needs to include, at the bare minimum, inclusionary zoning. And I think there are a lot of other items that a lot of other residents express that could be helpful along the way. With this plan passing, I don't see how we get there. So that's unfortunate. So I vote no.
President Adducey?
Well, I respect everyone's opinion. I respect everyone's comments tonight. And I've heard a lot of very important things. One I've heard is fix the inequity and be more inclusive. I've heard we need to value, those with value people, and we need to accommodate those with modest incomes. We need to support the integrated support housing for those with disabilities. I've heard we need to care for our seniors, those that want to age in place. I've heard how important it is that we value our community. And yet I think the Plan Commission worked hard and diligently. Now, granted, it was for the state, to comply for the state requirement, but it was more than that. They talked more than that. And as I said to Megan, this is a journey that we're on. We're on a journey. This is not the end of the journey. This is the beginning. And I think there's much more conversations that we need to do to make it a better plan. And I'm going to go on record. Every plan can always be better. And I believe we will make this a better plan. And I believe that it meets everything that we need to do now. I like res. I like action. I like to get things done. I like to move the needle. And I, unfortunately, don't agree with you, Erica. I think if we can implement some of these recommendations within the next year, it's going to take a year to two, I think we're going to move the needle significantly. And I will be here to actually see that, because I do believe the needle will be moved, and we need action to do it. We can't keep having more conversations around, I know, the issues that some people on the phone call and some people want. We need to begin the journey. We can't keep kicking the can down the road, and I will not allow, in my opinion, to keep kicking this plan down the road. Let's embrace it. It meets the state requirement. It can be better. We can make it better. And I believe it addresses all the things that our residents brought up tonight. So I'm a yes.
Motion passed.
Okay. So let's move on. Okay. So new business. You're up.
Thank you. On the agenda tonight is a update as it relates to the flooding that occurs at the 1100 and flows in, no pun intended, to the 1000 block of Keystone Avenue. And so at times when there are heavy rainfall events, Keystone Avenue receives a decent amount of on-street flooding. Now, while some residents also have backyard flooding, rear yard flooding, and there's some seepage issues, there really aren't any sewer backups to occur in this area, and that's really done by design. And so if you go back and look, I know I have shared the contents of a Zoom call I had with some of those residents with the trustees, so I hope you had a chance to review that. But going through the PowerPoint that's in the packet, so we'll go over to standby. If you're in page 309 of the PDF, the way this is just a very unique setup throughout the village as it relates to how the infrastructure is set up here. So there's a combined sewer that runs from Division at Keystone all the way south to Iowa, but for whatever reason at the 1100 block years and years and years ago, there were separate sanitary sewers that were installed that then flow north and then tie into the MWRD line. So essentially, if you're on the 1100 block at Keystone, you have a separated sewer system. If you're on the 1000 block at Keystone, just south of there, so if you use Thomas as the dividing line, more or less, if you're south of Thomas, you're on a combined system like most people in town. So the restrictors that are put in place on the catch basins on Keystone are done to essentially create some on-street detention so that the water doesn't rush into the combined system and ultimately flood basements of people on the 1000 block of Keystone and then south of there. So again, the system as it is designed and set up today is done deliberately and intentionally to avoid basement backups in this area. And to the best of our knowledge, that is being successful. The issue is that there's additional street flooding that has taken place over time, much to the frustration of a lot of the residents. And so we had this meeting with them, as I've shared with you, to have and start that conversation. The other thing that we've also done in the interim is that we have, after the sewer levels went down, Public Works went out there. They were due this year as part of our 5-year rotation of sewer televising and cleaning. This area was in line for that, so they had gone out there, Public Works, to do that. And during that, they had noticed a lot of root infiltrations. And so those root infiltrations were cleared out. And in addition to that, we'll be adding the section of Keystone Avenue that hasn't gone through our sewer relining program. We're adding that to the list this year. So when that contractor's out here in the next weeks, months to do their work, the area on Keystone that's a combined sewer will be fully lined to eliminate infiltrations in the future. That won't eliminate the on-street flooding. It will just allow for the amount of time that the flooding occurs to decrease, because the line will be clear and the water can flow out certainly a lot faster. So again, just to be clear with everyone, that's certainly going to help things, but it wouldn't eliminate the on-street flooding. Several years ago, staff started to look at this issue just to get a better sense of, for our own edification, what exactly the infrastructure was. And in my memo that I attached, we engaged Burke and Associates at that time to look at, okay, what could be some possible remedies for this, and what were some ballpark costs for that. So they provided 5 possibilities, in terms of how these could drain, and 1 and 2 essentially look at draining this into the NSMP either through essentially the either Dominican or down Thatcher, and then alternative number 2 goes down. I'm sorry, I have them reversed. 1 is to go down Park, division to Park, and then 2 would be going down to either Thatcher, or maybe as a possibility, maybe even cutting through Dominican's property if that's, or the Forest Preserve property if that's a possibility. And then the third item, which is similar to what we've done in other parts of Down on Lake Street and on Washington, where we've essentially just installed more storage. And so whether they're relief sewers or additional in-ground culverts or almost like a big dry well essentially that would be made out of concrete, that's a possibility too. The challenge you run in with that one is that because of the sheer size and scope of the project, you start running into a lot of utility conflicts and things like that. So where we're at now is is there an issue? Yes. If we would like to fix that issue, what I would recommend at this point, and we've already been in contact with Burke and Associates, they need about 30 to 60 days to the tune of about $10,000 to $15,000 to flesh out alternatives 1, 2, and 3 a little bit further, and then do one last look to see if there's any other alternatives that we could propose in this area. And then if the board would want to proceed, we would bring those back to you with a recommendation that would also include some sort of funding recommendation. Anything that would be paid for, certainly, as always, we always look for grant opportunities and things like that, but you more than likely would be looking at some sort of loan or bond issue for this. And if we were to do something, I would probably work, one of the goals for the Water and Sewer Fund this year is to do a AMI project, which is an automated metering infrastructure that would replace a majority of our water meters and create an infrastructure for all that to happen in real time. Same ballpark would be about $1 million for that, but we would try to, if we're going to issue some sort of debt instrument, we would want to try to combine those all at once. So that's my overview. Happy to answer any questions about the project and how you would want to proceed.
Hey, Eric, it's Bob. So I'm gonna wear 2 hats here tonight, trustee and resident. So the first thing I want to say is to a person on up and down the block who I've talked to, thank you to you, to John, to Jeff, and to Mark for getting on and doing a Zoom at 5 o'clock one night, and everyone is very appreciative of that. Just a couple of questions I have. It's the weirdest thing, and I think one of the biggest concerns that people have is, we're putting water in the street right now, and the biggest concern is if we change something, are we guaranteed that the people who live, quote unquote, downstream are now not going to have water in their basement? So that's number one. And number two, is there any mechanical, I'm really not very good with this, so I'm going to defer to Jeff on this one, is I have this system, it's called the double guard flood system, which, basically I have 2 sump pumps in my basement, I have overhead, and then I have pipes that go out to the street, okay? And the day after we had the webcast, the plumber showed up to do his annual servicing of this unit, which is in our front yard. And so maybe you know about it or maybe you don't, but is there something that instead of spending $1 million, is there something that could be done to the homes, either north or south of Thomas, to alleviate this situation without going through a construction project?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to, most folks would probably refer to like just a sewer, a backflow valve, a backflow prevention valve in the front yard. What that does is it allows water to flow from your house towards the municipal system. When the municipal system backs up, it kind of closes the valve and prevents the municipal system from backing up into your house. That is theoretically one possibility, but every home between Thomas Street and Iowa Street would have to have that installed in at 10 to 15,000 a piece as far as the cost goes. And then on top of that, we did hear from, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you heard from one resident, I heard from another one where they had those systems in place in the front yard, and two of them sounded like they failed to some degree in that last big rain event. So they're not 100% foolproof. The majority of residents that participate in the sewer backflow prevention program do utilize or do kind of move forward with that particular project, and overwhelmingly the majority seem to have success by sheer virtue of us not getting calls about them. But we did hear from a couple folks after that last rain event that did still experience some degree of backup.
So can I just suggest that gets thrown on the list and just at least have some conversation with Burke about that one, please?
Yeah. The problem, though, Trustee O'Connell, though, is if you do, so let's play that out for a second. Let's say you gave everyone a backflow preventer from Division all the way south to Iowa. That means and we pull the restrictors, the water was going to go into a pipe that, let's remember, is undersized, right? So you've got what, Jeff, 9 inches on 11,000 block, and then it goes into a 12.
It's 9 almost all the way down, I think, right before Iowa, where it connects to the MWD. It jumps to 12 for the last length of pipe, but everything else is 9.
So the street's still going to flood. It's not going to go in anyone's basement, but the water still has to go somewhere because there is not enough capacity in those pipes that eventually work its way down to Iowa, which then feeds into an MWRD line and then heads west. So we could certainly, I mean, that's a fairly easy number to pull together. My concern is if we did that, the residents would be right back to us and say, well, great, I don't have any water in my basement, but it's still ponding on the street because it still has nowhere to go.
And that's the question I had. I mean, are we talking about a problem where people's houses are flooding, or just their street is flooded for a period of time and it's inconvenient?
Yeah, I mean, in the conversation we had with the residents, you know, and we always do this, right? So you've got different types of flooding. So there's a backyard and street flooding that take place. That area of Keystone is a bowl, especially if you're at right up at the Keystone and Division there, kind of the southwest corner. I mean, as we mentioned in the presentation, the topography is just. What did I say? I get my corners right.
I think it's southeast.
Sorry. Southeast. So, you know, it's just a low area to begin with. So that water is generally, when it ponds in the street, I mean, you're going to get some street backyard flooding. You're going to get street flooding there because that's the low part. And then people will generally have, you know, seepage issues that they'll have to go ahead and deal with, you know, as any resident throughout town would have. So my understanding, again, is that the issue from the residents is, look, we're getting the street flooding more and more because the intensity of the storms is taking place. It's difficult for some of them to move their cars in and out of that area, and there's a general concern about, which I can certainly appreciate, just public safety vehicles being able to traverse in that area.
But from my own experience, this was the biggest rainfall ever in the history of my living here for 20 years, because it was actually, in my backyard, it was past my garage, which has never been before. So I'm just worried that we're trying to deal with a problem that hopefully is average.
Hey Tom, it's you know, even with a moderate rain, it fills up. And so again, it wasn't to the extent that what we had a couple of Sundays ago, but you know, in the 7 or 8 years that I've been here, it's probably been 4 times. But again, not with the severity that it was this past time. Then compounded with, you know, residents who had backyard flooding that led to seepage and kind of exacerbated the whole situation.
Question for Jeff. I think that what you were describing earlier was what I would call a French drain. The backflow preventer, and then it diverts it into a cistern underground in your front yard?
No, so what I was referring to, and I was just trying to interpret what Trustee O'Connell was talking about, but what I was referring to is the village has a reimbursement program for residents who install an overhead sewer or a sewer backflow prevention valve. That is basically kind of, that backflow valve is just a kind of a mechanical housing that gets inserted onto your sewer line that goes from your house to the municipal system. And it acts in a way that's such that when the municipal system backs up towards your house, it closes the valve so that that municipal system cannot back up anymore towards your house. Completely different than any sort of dry well or cistern or anything like that. It's just a mechanical housing that goes on your sewer line.
Okay. So it sounds like that backflow prevention valve would not be helpful in this situation?
Well, to Eric's point, it would help prevent anyone from getting sewer back up in their house, theoretically, but doesn't necessarily help the amount of flooding that occurs on the roadway or the amount of water that's trying to get through a somewhat choked off system. It's, to Eric's point, the 9-inch sewer, it's undersized. It's just, it reaches capacity pretty quickly. And
So
those
it's not
would
going to
not
help.
help.
It's not going to help with what they're complaining about.
Correct.
And so what about the, the underground cistern that some of us have, installed, to the tune of like $5,000 to $15,000, in our front yards? Would that be helpful?
Some folks put dry wells in, some folks put, perforated tanks or cisterns, or there are a lot of different terms we can use for these things. They certainly help get water underground, but that's one of the alternatives that Burke had looked at back in 2015 or 2016, was to put in a kind of commercial sized version of that, if you will, under the roadway. But the footprint that it required to make sure there was no flooding on the roadway was such that it became problematic with all the utilities that are running through there. It just takes up too much space.
Do residents
and it's very costly.
Yeah, got it. Do residents on that block already have these overhead drains and the cisterns or French drains in their front yards, or not?
So the residents on the 1100 block, so from Division to Thomas Street, those residents don't need any overhead sewer or backflow prevention valves because they're on a separate, their sewer system is separate. They're, in most of the village, everybody's sewer line from your house ties into the same sewer pipe that carries all the rainwater. On the 1100 block of Keystone, however, that's a separate sewer. So those residents are already kind of protected from sewer backup, which is why we see the, all the water on the roadway, but nothing in anyone's basement, it seems. So it's a little bit of a different beast there. As soon as you get south of Thomas, it becomes a bigger concern. Sewer backup, that is, becomes a much bigger concern.
Jeff, I'm sorry. Did you say that people aren't experiencing sewage, but they aren't experiencing water as well? So it's both, they're not flooding in their homes?
It's my understanding, and again, Eric or Trustee O'Connell, if I'm wrong, by all means, cut me off or correct me. It was my understanding that nobody up on the 1100 block got sewer backup in their home. I think there was one or two instances where maybe there was some seepage, so water kind of coming through cracks in a foundation or something like that. But I don't believe anybody got sewer backup on that 1100 block.
Yeah, I didn't talk to everybody, but I believe that's correct. It was all clean water. I mean, we rarely get anything in ours. I mean, there was so much rain, it was seeping up through our concrete floor. Sure. So, I mean, that's again, the quantity that we had, but nobody said anything about sewage at that point.
So it sounds like, for what it's worth, it sounds like the water, anybody that did receive water, it was just due to the massive amount of water that was in the ground, and the pressure continued to build up with Sunday's rain because of all the rain we had on that Thursday prior. And there was just so much pressure that, as Trustee O'Connell said, it would come through the cracks in the foundation or in the floor slab and kind of come up that way. And that's groundwater. It's completely different than the sewer backup.
I had a couple questions. Is this the only area that is experiencing this sort of street flooding? Are there any other sections of town that are experiencing a similar?
My understanding, this is the only area that receives this much street flooding this consistently. Certainly we have areas that inlets get clogged or inlets are kind of small for the amount of tributary area to them, but certainly nothing to this degree, as far as I know.
Okay, just wondering in terms of these would be direct costs for this area, and didn't know if we'd be looking at potentially doing it in other areas as well if there were other places. The flooding
I don't think so.
Okay, the flooding that happened north of the campus, north of Dominican on Keystone, is that a totally separate issue? So like the Smith's backyard that absolutely flooded, is that a separate thing going on? They just have their topography is causing that concern?
Yeah, anything in a backyard is likely just due to your point, topography, a slightly lower lying area than the surrounding area. We had that. I probably talked to 25 to 30 folks who experienced something along those lines throughout the village. So we have quite a few kind of low-lying pockets over 1 to 5 backyards that tend to collect water. But yes, completely, unless there's something else going on, it's probably just the lower lying area that collected a lot of water.
Okay, last question right now. In terms of the 3 potential suggestions, is there a sense of ultimately which ones, I don't know if you can even quantify it this way, the percentage of success, of likelihood of success? Does that make sense? Like, is one potentially, we got to feel more comfortable that one solution is really going to be effective. I mean, to your point, as far as the backfill and the fact that even those, a couple residents maybe saw that didn't work so effectively.
Yeah,
I mean,
you get that sense.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I think when Christopher Burke Engineering kind of looks at this, they look at trying to manage a certain level event, right? We all talk about 100-year events, things like that. So when Burke looks at trying to solve a problem like this and analyzes multiple alternatives, they're looking at trying to hit a 50-year event in a few different ways. So theoretically, they're addressing the same rain event with these alternatives. It just becomes a game of how much money is the village, willing to or wanting to spend to meet that goal. I don't think any one of these is, your point, we're not relying on backflow valves or things like that can potentially fail. Certainly each one has pros and cons, but I don't think that any one of them, if we thought there wasn't a high degree of, I don't want to say success, but if we had major concerns about any one of these, I don't think we would have discussed them with Burke in the first place.
Jeff, was the seepage related to the restrictor plates, or would that happen even if there were unrestricted sewer access?
It depends how. So if the restrictor plates restricted the water such that it ponded so widely that it was next to foundations, then yes, they would have been related.
But did that happen?
I don't believe so. I don't recall hearing from anyone, again, John or Eric, correct me if you heard otherwise, I don't remember hearing from anyone that the water ponded to the point where it was up against people's houses. Trustee O'Connell, if you've got anything else.
So we kind of have a little bit of unique situation, a few houses right over here, because the other thing that we have that adds to it is we get all the runoff that comes from the train, from the rail area. And so if you look at Frank and Gail Paris's house, Rob, who lives 2 doors north of me, even my neighbor next door, I mean, they required the fire department pump and hose to get stuff out of their backyards. So it's kind of, again, to Eric's point, this area is a little bit of a bowl. So, it varies from storm to storm. So,
but it got really bad, right, Bob? This last time, right? I mean, in terms of feet-wise, it wasn't even inches, right?
Well, in the part of the issue too was when we were back out on, that storm was Sunday night, and in I think to Trustee Hennick's comments, you're always going to have certain pockets of town that may experience some flash flooding because there's just so much rain that has come down and the sewer system is small, it's going to have to pond somewhere, and then it give it an hour or so and it'll come back down and get back into the system. The Keystone Street was still underwater on Monday morning, And so I think part of that's attributable to the infiltrations that are in the street, and we'll certainly correct those. In fact, we were kind of talking about hopefully there's a downpour pretty soon, because we want to see how effective that has been, certainly. But then secondarily, this is just an area that it's going to drain slower than everybody else. And again, that's intentional because we don't want it to go in people's basements.
Okay. So
just one last comment. So David enjoyed the meeting, but he had to go to bed. He basically just sent a note that said he's supportive of plans 1 and 2 and love to get a vote going to move on 1 as soon as possible. So I'll provide him with an update if I see him around the neighborhood of our next steps. So I just wanted to share that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, where are we? What direction do we want to give Eric and team?
So if the board would like to continue on a path forward here, what we would recommend is, we've already been in contact with Burke about updating their 2016 kind of a small study, micro study, if you want to call it that. They would go ahead and update that with updated financial figures, and also just ensure there were no other possibilities that existed, solutions, if you will, that we haven't left on the table. So we would want an opportunity to do that, and I think we can pull that together in 30 to 60 days.
Okay.
Works for me.
Okay.
What's the cost of updating that study? I'm looking for that.
John Anderson, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking about 10 to 15,000.
Approximately, he said 9 to 12,000 in his email.
All right, so the plan would be to go ahead with the rooting out of the trees that have infiltrated, relining it, and updating that study.
Correct. The infiltration work has already been completed, so that line is now clear as day. We're still going to line it this summer in the section which is a little bit farther downstream, so we get that done. So that all of those blocks of Keystone and to Iowa will be lined, and then doing the study and getting those updated numbers, and again other possible solutions back to you. And then the idea would be you would, as a board, pick one of those, and we can Rosie and I will start putting together some financial information as well. Because you're gonna have to borrow money to do this. We don't have that type of cash reserve on hand to fund this.
And so, just to clarify again, the additional study will be about $9,000 to $12,000, and that's going to be able to tell us that these 3 options still work with updated cost projections.
And any other solutions that the consultants may have thought of between 2016 and now.
Okay. Would there be an expectation that once we went with the plan and digging started to happen, that, it seems like anytime you're opening up something, you always have that possibility, right, that they're going to find something unexpected? Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. So the next, if we get back to you in a month or two, and we give you 3 or 4 solutions, the next step then would be to do design work, permitting work, that would actually lead to construction. So part of permitting is, you need MWRD review if we're utilizing other private property, such as maybe the Forest Preserve or Dominican. If we needed their help, we would have to go ahead and do that. There's more surveys, review of utilities. Yeah, there's always stuff that can come up as part of the due diligence and design work. That's always a possibility. But then we, work diligently to, address those issues and work through them so we can build the project.
So this 9,000 to 12,000 is just to let us know what plans, but then there'll be a separate cost to design it, and then yet still the cost of actually implementing.
Correct.
Any sense of a ballpark for the design cost?
Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but 10% of construction value, isn't that kind of a
general rule of thumb?
Yeah. So if the project's $1 million, you're looking at probably $100,000 for design. And again, that's you have the design cost, the construction cost, the construction site overview that takes place when we hire an engineer to manage the project, much like we did with the NSMP when we designed that. So there are more costs that get built into that, undoubtedly. So.
Okay.
A considerable cost. Okay.
So, what do you need? Just guidance and direction on the $10,000, or
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. I think everybody. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say certainly it's the money, but it's the consensus that we're going to move forward with the studying the project further, getting this information and bringing it back.
Well, I'm for that. I think we need to do it for the sake of the residents over there. What is that?
Does anyone, I guess the
Yeah,
question would
opposed
be,
to
from
it.
anyone from the board object on that?
Okay, it doesn't sound like it. So, okay.
So I have my direction.
Right.
And just as one point of clarification, I didn't hear any objections to the mailing for the deer survey. So not to jump back on that, but I want to make sure there's no objections to doing the mailing.
No,
Again, within my spending authority, but I didn't, just want to make sure.
I think it didn't sound like there was an objection.
Okay, just double check.
Just double check it, so
Just
we
double
don't
check.
have another long conversation.
Okay, so all right, two just other updates for you under new business that I wanted to provide you. One was on the River Forest Community Center building study. So last week we pulled together our stakeholders to review the preliminary findings from the consultant. So I just want to give you an update on that. 3 options were presented. One option included a kind of a renovation addition option where they took the existing shell and built off of that. Number 2 was a new construction option where they would phase in a new construction project on the existing site. And the third one was to build a new project at an alternative site. The one site they had looked at was over by the Public Works garage, just to give us a third option, and not really having a lot of open land in town. That was just something that the consultant put forward as a suggestion. The stakeholders, again, they met. They liked of the 3 options, 2 and 3 the most in terms of looking for some maybe additional information and study. The cost of the building is certainly not insignificant. Looking even on 2 and 3, you're looking in the range of $40 to $45 million. And certainly here a lot of money, undoubtedly. But again, we're also not doing this as a short-term, one-off type solution. This is to build a community center facility that's going to last you 50 plus years, right? So while certainly it is a lot of money, I think realizing that this is an investment in the community long-term is something to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we do some additional research and follow-up here. So in terms of next steps that the committee wanted to look at, we're going to examine one item was to examine the feasibility of building the gyms over the parking deck. So right now they're structuring the parking deck on the one side and some of the other buildings and usable space on the other. They want to see about putting the gymnasiums on top of the parking deck. That's pretty simple. We're going to do a further evaluation of the pros and cons of each option. There is a desire to do some analysis on what the cost is to do nothing. So if the plan ultimately is to stay put, there's still a dollars and cents component to that. And there is also indirect costs of what that may mean, and more those intangible items what that may mean to the community. What do financing options look like? How would that ultimately be structured? What a proposed governance structure would ultimately look like? And then also trying to understand the percentage of the building use, meaning if one stakeholder group is using 50% of the building, how does that equate and work back into a discussion about costs and rent and things of that nature, and then the overall ownership. So there's going to be further discussion on that, and then we'll put a timetable, obviously, with these items as well. So I think good work by the consultant. Still, obviously, some more work to do here, just to obviously understand it, get our head wrapped around it, and to be able to, make some better decisions moving forward. But I wanted to provide you an update on that and let you know where that project stood. So a good status update, but still more work that we need to do. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
Eric, the next step measure you talked about, does that require an additional outlay by the village, or is that incorporated in the original contract we signed?
Well, right now that other stuff is more, I would say, more of a staff item to do. We would maybe rely on our TIF consultants and financial consultants to help a little bit with the financing options, but some of those things will be, items that Rosie and I can work on as well, just to give a kind of a broad brushstroke of how that would be set up and be layered. So there may be a little soft cost involved, but not a lot.
Eric, if I recall correctly, there are other plans for civic centers in our areas. I think somebody was talking about Menards at one place, and just want to see how that factors into these kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Yep, we can add that to the list. Yep.
Well, I think that's a question now, right?
Okay.
Was it Menards?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't talked to Phil in some time. My last understanding was the Menards project, someone else came in and put essentially a non-contingent bid on that and was in the process of purchasing that property. So I know Phil and his group were looking at alternative sites as well. So but again, I haven't talked to him in a couple months, so I don't have a latest and greatest update on where they are. But I am fairly confident that the Menards site is no longer on the table.
Based on my confidential conversations with a member of the park board, it's not going to happen, at least for the park district.
Yeah, I think it's. I think you're right. I think it's the transaction fell through. So, but it's a good idea at the time.
Eric, when you talked about there being costs to not doing the plan, what are some examples of that? I mean, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm looking at, I guess, in kind of two buckets. One, the financial cost of the building upgrades. Like, so that building is also at a crossroads. That's our word tonight. In terms of, I think there's some preventative maintenance and some work that the township, in their role in the Civic Center Authority Board and the Community Center, has said, well, let's hold off for the time being until we get a better handle on this and what we think is going to happen moving forward. Now, they still may have to, even if we do something, depending on the timing of that, they may still have to do things like that. But, understanding what the next, 2 years, 5 years, maybe 10 years look like in terms of, roofs and HVAC and electrical and things like that, just to try to put some sort of number associated with that would be number one. And then number two, in the other bucket would be what other items that that we could identify that then the community would not be having, in terms of maybe recreational space, gymnasium space, things like that aren't, I can't monetize as well, but everyone would have to put their own individual value on what those things are, but trying to do that as well.
Okay. And then I guess to clarify too, just so I understand, if we were to move forward, is this just a plan that all the taxing bodies are deciding without any sort of referendum to the community, or would this eventually go to referendum once we decided on a route?
Yeah, I mean, it's a large expense. It's not an expense that the TIF district could take on in and of itself, certainly. We would have to look for outside and multiple funding sources. I don't think it would all come from one bucket, but potentially, but I certainly wouldn't take off the table a referendum at this point.
And no, any thoughts on even just a referendum of getting a pulse of the community that they would support this project.
So you'd be talking more of a non-binding,
Like an advisory, an advisory referendum question about, would the community like to see our taxing bodies work together now that we know the costs? I mean, I know we talked about hiring the consultant in the first place just to get a needs assessment and to get a sense of what we could do. Now that we've done that, and now we're looking at some guesstimative numbers, which are not insignificant. How do we kind of assess the community if this is something that we want to move forward on?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the real question, I guess, is does all the taxing bodies agree to it? Right.
Right. That's the question, and we still have a little bit more work to do.
Right.
So Eric, if I could, so I was on the call. It was a very pleasant conversation. I don't think anybody threw their cards on the table, but I think everybody was willing to listen. I think people have some ideas of what their particular organizations need, and I think that's part of the conversation that where Eric left it with a lot of them is, think about what you need, and then kind of, let's come back together. So this was kind of the first call, but again, everybody was very polite about it. Nobody was committed. So.
Well, yeah. So that's the issue. We do a lot of we like to talk. The question becomes, when does this get into seriousness conversation, and what's the threshold for that conversation? Is it money? Is it feasibility? Is it what? So
I would say money, feasibility, and control.
Okay. So if it's money, then I agree with Patty. I mean, you got to have some idea of if the community is interested in it. Unfortunately, that's a tough sell, but it's a better sell if everyone's behind it. All the taxing bodies, I'm saying.
Right. No, and I would have expected nothing less than the call being pleasant with everybody. That's
exactly.
What we want, of course.
Right.
But I do think, again, these conversations started prior to our current situation with the pandemic and the loss of jobs for folks. And, we don't know what's going to happen come end of summer, fall. Are we looking at more loss of jobs for people, loss of income to the village? I mean, we're kind of, in some ways, in an unknown. It almost seems difficult to think about a big ticket item like this, not knowing at this point how we're going to kind of flesh out financially and how our residents going to flesh out in order to be able to get behind this. So, I mean, I recognize this is something we've talked about, but times change and things change. And I think what we started with planning, we may have to pivot.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, the market, you can never time the market. If we could, we'd be all rich. I would say, we have to think as a group, and this is Eric and I've talked about this, it is a community center, regardless who controls it, regardless who governs it for a minute, is it something that it's a vision. It's something that has to, 50 to 100 years, it will be in place. And so it's a vision that, is this something that we envision our community having in the next 50 years? Because if it's not us, it goes no different than the last conversation we had. If it's not us, there is nobody doing the work. And so the question becomes, and we just have to think about it. We don't have to make a decision tonight, just how much, because it's not going to be a decision overnight. It's not going to be a referendum overnight. It's not even going to be a structure for years. But is this worth pursuing if we believe we need a true community center in our community which I believe we do. But it's going to take a lot of effort and time to, bring it all together and convince the community as well.
Well, I guess somewhat of my concern is getting too far without getting a sense from the community is that I feel like what happens then is that we spend the money for this review, we have all these meetings, spend a lot of time of people visiting this, right? And then residents start to voice concerns, and then they're told, well, but we've spent a lot of hours talking about this and discussing this, and it seems this is what our taxing bodies wanted. And it's like we get so far down a point that we don't feel like we can pull back. And even when we're hearing from our residents we need to pull back, we've decided we've gone too far to do that. And so
I don't disagree. I think I think we need to take some next steps in order to be able to answer questions, and that's kind of, I think Eric was pretty clear to the team is, I'm going to come back with you with a little bit more information, and then at some point in time, if we decide we want to pull the plug on it, then we pull the plug. But I don't think we're spending tons of time or money at this point in time. I mean, there's staff time involved in pulling together, what financially, how could we do this and everything. But I think we have to take the next step in order to answer the questions of the residents.
All I could tell you is, and I agree with that. I mean, but we're in a unique situation. It's a TIF district, and it's a aging, as Eric said, it's an aging, and I think even the township knows that, a building, and that ultimately it's something's going to have to be done with it. Now, it's not our responsibility, but I feel it is because they look to the village for guidance and help, and I think we need to have everybody work together. So we'll see where this goes. I mean, I know it's late. I mean, it's a bigger discussion than just tonight. So we'll see where it goes, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, and then last item, just want to give you an update on Lake and Lathrop. So I'm pleased to report that the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency late in middle to late May gave a conditional approval of the developer's remedial action plan and associated documents that will allow the developer to commence the remediation on the project site. So the only condition of the plan was a very minor in nature, was regarding the depth of a soil boring that has to be taken as part of the process. So instead of 15 feet, it has to be 20 feet. So a very minor comment. So again, that plan is approved. As you may have noticed, the removal of the debris on site has started back up. That will be done to help facilitate the remediation work. So as I had a chance to pop over there today, that work is being done in earnest. I think they've even started removing some of the remaining foundations as well to get that moved out of the way. So a very positive step. Somewhat of a momentous step as well at that site. A lot of the other work that's been kind of going on behind the scenes, there's been a lot of work on the relocation of the electrical utilities there. So that work is being done by ComEd. That has commenced. There's lines are being buried from essentially where the electricity across east from west on Lathrop. That power will then run south on Central and then work its way back up into the project. At the same time, there's a new line being run from the west side of Ashland, again, having it bored underneath the street and to feed the building that will remain there. So there's that, and I apologize, I don't have the address off the top of my head, but where the office building is, my gym, the dry cleaners, Pact is over there. That building then will be fed. Now it's being fed from the east, and now will be fed from the west. Village worked hard to make sure those lines were buried. They were, so we're pleased to have that done. And so that work is currently ongoing, and it's hopefully it should be wrapped up. We're hoping for June 13th. They pushed it out another week, so around June 20th, June 22nd. And then the developer is expected to close on the issuance of his bridge loan that would pay for that remediation work. That should be happening in the next 1 to 2 weeks. And the village attorney has been involved with those conversations as it relates to the any paperwork that has to be reviewed by the village from the bank as authorized from the last amendment to the redevelopment agreement. So all positive items that I wanted to share with you tonight.
So I kind of recall that June 15th was one of the milestone dates. What was he required to do by June 15th?
So there's his next date is to he's got 30 days. The developer has 30 days from the IEPA go ahead to essentially start construction. Realistically, they are working to begin the remediation work first, but obviously before they do the construction. So they're going to start that in earnest, and then once that is done, then the refocus on getting the construction started. So they obviously can't do the construction until they get the remediation done first. But there's no. I'd have to go back and look, Trustee Karji, but I'm fairly confident there's no June 15th date. The village attorney shaking his head in agreement, right? Yes. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember June 15th. Yeah, so. Okay. Any other questions for Eric on that? If none, then I think we don't have an executive session, right?
No.
Okay. Then I'd ask.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, very good. Can I hear a second?
Second.
All right. Nobody wants to adjourn. All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. No.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate all your time. I know we're taking a lot of time, so thank you so much and enjoy your evening.
Good night.
All right. Bye-bye. All right.